Ambulance, is the patient breathing?
No, they're not. There's two people here, nothing.
I just can't believe that another human being is capable of doing things like that.
They're both in their 80s, I think, but they're both like in their blood, and I think they're both dead.
There was blood absolutely everywhere. It was like something from some sort of horrible Hollywood film.
If the lady's got a bag on her head, it's suspicious. We do need the police here.
How can you put that level of violence on someone so elderly that can't fight back?
Things like this don't happen in Shirebrook.
They're sending shivers through the whole community.
Potentially we could have a serial killer on our hands.
Can they real, please? Oh, God.
Ready? Yeah, this one.
Once they got their suspect, they could arrest him.
The level of violence that he'd used, he was a threat to anybody.
Police, stay we are! Stay we are!
Just to confirm, mate, you're under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Frida Walker between 14th and 15th of January, the attempted murder of Kenneth Walker. Right.
This is a massive turning point in the investigation.
Later on in court.
He carried out a really savage attack on this couple. It really was absolutely vile.
Shirebrook, Derbyshire. A traditional market town of barely 10,000 people.
It's a small community, really. The mines closed in the 80s, changed the dynamics of it greatly. But it is the type of town, even all these years later, that people look after each other. They all know each other. There's not many communities like that these days, but this is one of them. It's a town that's very traditional. It has people who are born there, raised there, tend to live there. It's very proud.
In the heart of this tight-knit community, on Station Road, live pensioners Ken and Frida Walker.
They were just really well-known, well-liked. They were both in their late 80s. They'd lived in the house in Station Road for 60 years. I first met Ken because he was an active member of the town council. Very, very well respected in the town, as was Frida.
They met each other at the dance, like 22, Frida was. Oh, she loved dancing, always immaculately dressed and whatever. She was just beautiful inside, out.
She'd do anything for anybody. She'd got a heart of gold. We never, ever had a crossword. This street, very close. Very close. We always have been.
But barely days after Ken's 88th birthday, life on Station Road is about to change forever. It's Friday afternoon, and Frida stops by to see neighbour Lynn and another friend, Richard.
On the Friday night, we were having a cup of coffee, and it started to get a bit dark. And Richard says, "I'll just walk you down the street then, Frida." And that was at 6 o'clock.
The last contact anybody had with Frida or Ken that day was at 6:30, just before Emmerdale was due to begin. They had a neighbour to whom they were extraordinarily close, who planned to come round, telephoned and said, look, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to tuck up in my pyjamas. My TV's working again now. I'll watch it here. And then she sought to telephone Frida back after, was to discuss, really, no doubt, what had happened in Emmerdale and how thrilling the plot had been, but there was no reply to that.
Next morning, however, Ken and Frida's home seems eerily quiet.
She was supposed to ring me that Saturday morning. Didn't ring me. This is strange because Frida's normally on time. Then I got a gut feeling something was wrong. So I kept ringing the house. And no answer.
Nobody answered. So I says, well, do you want me to nip down? Oh, yeah, if you don't mind. And put my boots on and went. And paper was in letterbox, milk were on step. I'm knocking, shouting, Frida, so, you know, Frida. Look, couldn't see anything. I thought I'd had somebody fell.
And then she walked down this alleyway here to the back of the house. And as you can see, there's a wooden gate there. They went through that gate. And on this occasion, the back door, I think it was closed, but it was unlocked. So the neighbour let herself in.
So I just knocked on the door, stepped in, shouted, it's only me, Frida. And I just looked to my right and Frida were laid face down. And I looked in the room and I could just see Ken's legs. I just thought something terrible's happened here.
Judith dashes outside to flag down a passerby for help.
I rung police and ambulance.
Ambulance, is the patient breathing?
No, they're not. There's two people in. I think they're both...
Okay, tell me exactly what's happened.
I've come round and I didn't touch them. I think they're both dead. There's two people, that man and a lady. They're both in their 80s, I think, but they're both laid there in the blood. And
okay.
She's got a bag on her head and a tie around her wrist. Oh, yeah, please. I've told police as well, please. You must get the man. I can't, I think he's okay.
Okay, so I do understand.
If the lady's got a bag on her head, it's suspicious. We do need the police here. Can they hurry up, please?
We are en route, okay. We're running on the highest category. We are coming on lights inside. It's okay.
Oh, God.
I just can't seem to forget it. In your lifetime, would you ever think you'd see something like that, you know?
I was expecting it to be quite a quiet day, and then the call came across saying that a body had been found, which is an incredible tragedy. And changed everything for the community.
Derbyshire police officers race straight to Ken and Frida's home.
The emergency services, both in terms of paramedics and the police, were on the scene extraordinarily quickly.
It was like something from some sort of horrible Hollywood film, unfortunately. Basically, both Ken and Frida, they'd had the legs and the hands hog-tied, which is awful. I believe Frida had a plastic bag over her head and she'd been gagged. So it looked like, to everybody that was there, a scene of torture, which I'm sure it probably was.
And there was blood absolutely everywhere at the scene. It must have been just the most horrific thing for anyone to have witnessed.
The elderly couple's bodies had been mercilessly beaten in a violent attack. Station Road soon turns into a crime scene.
The police tape is put up, entry to the scene is closely monitored, and indeed it's recorded in a log. And anybody entering the scene has to wear a hazmat suit and foot coverings and hand coverings so that they don't contaminate the scene.
I drew the blinds and I thought, whatever's going off out here? There were police cars, ambulances and everything. The street was being cordoned off. I thought something horrible's gone on.
Frida's niece, Sandra, however, is tragically unaware of the unfolding events.
Eventually, I rung one of her best friends. I said, where's Frida? She said, don't you know? And I just said it. She's dead, isn't she? And she said, yes. Frida's been murdered. Couldn't believe it. Devastated. I'm getting upset now.
Police immediately launch an investigation.
Initially, they thought that both people were dead, but Ken had actually survived incredibly, very seriously injured. So the ambulance took Ken away to a hospital, and then basically the police are dealing with a murder scene.
The couple's friends and family struggle to take in the news.
He was so badly beaten. It was unbelievable. How can you put that level of violence on someone so elderly that can't fight back? It beggars belief, doesn't it?
I just can't believe that another human being is capable of doing things like that. I just can't take it in.
Police need to establish who would want to harm these two pillars of the local community.
The difficulty for them was that there was no obvious immediate motive. There was no rational explanation as to why anyone should have wanted to have attacked this elderly couple in their own home at all.
Things like this don't happen in Shirebrook. We were concerned if there was somebody out there that they were capable of this.
And the race is on to find a killer before it's too late.
It could happen again. Potentially we could have a serial killer on our hands.
In Shirebrook, Derbyshire, the community's reeling from the violent attack on a couple in their 80s, found bound, gagged, and left for dead. Former District Council Chairman Ken Walker is fighting for his life in hospital. His wife Frida is discovered lifeless in a pool of blood.
The crime scene was horrific. Frida was found lying on the kitchen floor. She'd had her head covered by numerous coverings. Her hands and feet were tied together with what ultimately was discovered to be bindings that had been taken from her own sewing box. She was covered in blood. She died as a result of head injury and blocked airway, and the airway was physically blocked by the wrappings that had been placed in a mouth to try and gag her. She had numerous lacerations around her head where she'd been kicked or punched. This was not just one blow, it was repeated blows to Frida.
The crime scene was particularly violent. There were large quantities of blood throughout the downstairs of the property. There was blood visible on opposite walls within the living room and within the kitchen area, which indicated that there had been a sustained attack taking place.
It was truly one of the most violent attacks on an elderly person that you could possibly imagine. The house was immediately made a crime scene, as well as the streets and frontage around those properties, to see what evidence we could recover. They call it the golden hour. It's the first time when you start knocking on people's doors. We start getting detectives in from around the East Midlands to start making those inquiries.
The incident room was quite chaotic, organised chaos. Lots of people there, key roles been given out.
It was apparent almost immediately that Ken and Frida had no enemies. There was no motive initially for this attack. It was totally out of the blue, which was, I think, why it shocked the community so much.
We had no idea who was involved in this, so you're obviously concerned for the community.
It really is a shocking event, especially for an elderly couple. I mean, they're both mid-80s. It should never have happened. The fact that it did happen sent, shivers through the whole community. The residents in the locality were frightened.
Total shock. Nothing like that had ever happened, and particularly when you look at Ken and Frida, you could not imagine why anyone would want to attack them at all.
It was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. She didn't deserve that. She did not deserve to die like that.
It don't seem real, does it? It's not Freda. It's not Angie Freda in her own home by a cooker. And that's where she was murdered.
While police try to track down a violent killer, news has spread and the national media has descended upon this quiet town.
I think once the details of the killing were made public, it really sent shockwaves through Shirebrook. This was a town that nothing like this ever happened. So to hear such violent details of such a well-known couple, I think there was definitely fear in the town, without a shadow of a doubt.
I was inundated with people coming to the door, BBC News, ITV News. I says, all I can tell you is Freda was my best friend for over 50 years. And I said, now please go away.
With tensions running so high in Shirebrook, it's up to the local beat sergeant, Mark, to rally the community.
We didn't have a suspect. There were no immediate eyewitnesses. So my job as a safe neighbourhood sergeant really is to manage the fears and the concerns of the community, to offer reassurances. And the last thing we need is fear. What we want is people, first of all, to be reassured. And secondly, the great thing about Shirebrook is it is a close-knit community. The community will do everything they can to resolve stuff like this. Detectives and people from my team will start doing house-to-house inquiries. If you look up there, you can see a CCTV camera. We're looking for people who perhaps saw something that was suspicious. We're trying to identify people that have got cameras and may have recorded critical evidence.
But an initial trawl of local CCTV cameras doesn't throw up any leads.
It was Friday night. People are out, going out, coming back, walking the dogs. There was movement all over the angles of CCTV we had, but we just didn't have enough information in the initial stages to identify which one of those was our suspect.
With CCTV proving fruitless, police hope finding a motive for the attack will lead them to their killer.
So the initial thoughts were that potentially this could be relating to a burglary that had gone wrong. Some boxes had been opened in one of the upstairs bedrooms and had been laid out on the bed. We thought that perhaps this may have been that they were looking for money or jewellery within the property.
Ken was very well off. Ken looked after his money apart from his obsession. He could not walk past a betting station. He was extremely tight with his money. Freda used to tell me that very often things that she wanted, she had to pay for herself.
Delving into the couple's finances, police discover that 2 months before the attack, Ken made a massive withdrawal from his bank account, £30,000 in cash.
It soon came to light that they had a substantial amount of money within the house. This became the focus of the investigation. Was it because somebody had found out about that money and had gone to try and take it? It was stored all over the house. It was in cupboards, it was in pockets, it was in boxes.
Forensic investigators scour the crime scene in the hope of finding DNA left behind by the suspected burglar turned killer.
We sent off items like the outer pillowcase that had been put over Freda's head and some of the bindings. We'd identified these as being high potential, that we'd potentially get a DNA profile from them relating to our suspect.
Yeah, it was frustrating. They came back with no DNA profile.
We were now a couple of days into the investigation and still nobody has a name or a potential idea of who our perpetrator is in this case.
In the initial stages of this investigation, it was an absolute whodunit.
So detectives focus on another discovery made at the crime scene. But this one has really caught their eye.
A baseball cap had been found on the floor in the dining room.
It looked unusual where it was. and that was recovered from where Ken was tied.
It was not something that Ken or Frida would wear.
We thought there was potential for it to have been dropped by an offender.
The cap is rushed off to the forensics lab. Next day, it's a result.
Once we got this DNA hit, the suspect's DNA was on the national DNA database. It feels like scoring a goal at Wembley.
Their prime suspect, 33-year-old Romanian national, Vasil Culier.
That was a breakthrough that the investigation team needed. People are working 20 hours a day, so it was a massive lift.
As soon as we got the hit, we immediately started planning to make that arrest.
In Shirebrook, Derbyshire, police are on the hunt for a brutal killer. 86-year-old Frida Walker has been beaten to death in her home. Her 88-year-old husband, Ken, has also been violently attacked and is fighting for his life. A cap left at the scene has been linked by DNA to 33-year-old Vasil Culier. With the suspect now identified, a bloodied fingerprint found on the kitchen door is put under the microscope.
By running them on the database, when they were suspect checked against Vasil Culier, they came back as a match. So we now have a DNA profile and also fingerprints in blood at our crime scene. So at the time of the assault, when the blood was wet, so it was an absolute breakthrough to get his name.
Culier was known to us previously, had been arrested once before, but other than that, we knew very little about him.
He had one previous conviction for assault on his previous girlfriend, which was why he was on the DNA database. We needed now to get an arrest team because of the level of violence that he'd used on Station Road. He was a threat to anybody, so it had to be an armed arrest.
Ready? Yeah, this one.
Please! Armed officers forced entry to the address.
Please, stay where you are. Stay where you are. We have the body back.
The firearms team went in. He was in his bedroom. He was arrested, handcuffed.
Hands on that wardrobe now. Hands on that wardrobe. Hands on the door. What's your name? Vasil. Sorry? Vasil. Vasil. Yes. Okay, sit up.
His demeanour was quite strange because he didn't seem that bothered.
Right, just to confirm, mate, you're under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Frida Walker between 14th and 15th of January, and the attempted murder of Kenneth Walker. Right, so you don't have to take him to Mount information. We're just running court.
He was then taken to Ripley Police Station, where he was processed.
I was there waiting for him with two colleagues. It was a strange one, really, because of the level of violence inflicted on Ken and Frida. I was expecting quite a big person. Me and my colleague were like, have we got the right person here? Because he was quite slight in height and in weight, quite wiry.
Back at Culier's home, police scour his bedroom for evidence.
There was a number of other people living there. They were treated as witnesses and removed from the address, but now we had a second crime scene to process that would prove pivotal to the investigation. We found documents in there that identified that he was in debt and he had a gambling problem.
He was in debt to the tune of about £11,000. As soon as he got paid on the Friday, he was broke on the Saturday.
So it was starting to build a motive for why he may have wanted to take Ken and Frida's money.
And we seized over 30 pairs of shoes because the pattern of the footwear that was recovered at the crime scene in blood, both in the kitchen, in the alleyway and in the upstairs bathroom, were a peculiar design. It wasn't a design that was known to us. So all shoes were taken from the house.
We found some Plimsoll trainers and a coat. Both those were found to have his blood on them.
Whilst these are sent off for forensic analysis, back at the station, Culier is interrogated.
Coulier had decided to go no comment to all the questions.
The clock is now ticking. We've now got initially 24 hours to try and get an account and get in a position to get a charging decision from CPS for him.
News of the arrest is the talk of the town.
They'd actually got him in custody. Grateful that they'd found him so quickly.
People were so relieved that someone had been arrested. The ill feeling towards that person is unbelievable, which is understandable. You know, a lot of people hurt by it.
Not exactly happy. I just wanted to wring his neck.
With Coulier refusing to talk, police need to build a case to charge him. They seize his Audi and, using his number plate, can retrace his every move on the night of the attack, using ANPR traffic cameras.
It gave us ANPR showing that he came into the village and when he left the village. Ultimately, it gave us something to look for on the CCTV. It gave us a target to follow, and it was shown through painstaking work and hours of viewing CCTV that the car had been driving around on Station Road.
The CCTV builds a picture of Coulier's movements in the hours leading up to the murder.
The 14th of January was a day off for Vasyl Coulier. He'd spent the day gambling. It was before 8:30 when he drew £280 out of a cash machine in Shirebrook. He then immediately went to the Betfred, where he played on the fruit machines for some time. He went to 2 more bookmakers to feed his gambling habit before returning back into Shirebrook. It was at that point that the car was seen repeatedly circling around the Station Road area.
It's spotted chillingly close to the home of Ken and Frida Walker.
Throughout the day from 1:30, he did 4 recce's in and around Station Road in that vehicle.
Later on in the afternoon, the car was abandoned. It was then when Coulier decided to go on foot and start recceing the address even closer. And as time went on, as CCTV was checked further,
crucially, it gave us what clothing he was wearing at the time, and he had quite a distinctive green parka on with a fur hood that showed Coulier wearing that green parka, which was recovered from his bedroom at the scene, outside Station Road. We tracked him, and he did a further 4 recce's, again, 2 left-hand, 2 right-hand side of the house. So it was clear that he was deciding when and how he was going to get into that house.
About 6:30 in the evening, he disappeared off the CCTV and didn't reappear on the CCTV until about 9:15, for the best part of 3 hours.
Enough time, police suspect, for Coulier to carry out his brutal attack. And before long, the DNA results are back from the bloodstains on his parka and trainers.
Both were found to have blood on relating to Frida Walker.
It's the breakthrough that you're looking for. It starts a chain of events that you can build upon to build that case. Once you've got that information, you know you've got probably the right man.
And the trainers reveal even more incriminating evidence.
The sole prints from the trainers were unique.
There was a small stone trapped in the sole of the shoe.
And that could clearly be seen by the experts within the blood-stained footprints on the kitchen floor. That led the expert to be able to conclusively say that those footprints were made by those pair of trainers.
He was happy to conclude that it was the exact shoe.
On top of that, within Coulier's boot of his car was a fluorescent vest that was found to have blood on. It was something that he put on after the offence had happened and walked back to the car with. We may never know why he did that, other than to change his appearance from when he went into the address.
And it came back that some of the blood that was found on the high-vis jacket came back to Frida. So again, we had another link back to the scene.
His fingerprints were in blood at the address. His DNA was on the bindings of Ken and Frida. His DNA was on the hat. Frida's blood was on his clothes. When you marry all those together, you had an enormously strong forensic case.
And technology finally tips the case against Coulier.
I think one of the more interesting pieces of evidence that helped to build this case was the radio frequency survey. And it will help us tell if there's any mobile phone activity in that area. Fortunately, there had been a text message from a gambling advert to Coulier's phone, which pinged it. It showed he was there at 6:30, which put him within yards of the address at the time that the offence was about to begin.
Today, a man has been charged for the murder of 86-year-old Frida Walker and the attempted murder of 88-year-old Kenneth Walker.
I think there was probably a feeling of relief in Shirebrook, certainly when they were charged, because that means that this person who's committed this absolutely horrific crime is off their streets.
With feelings running so high, the scene's set for a dramatic murder trial.
The forensic evidence was overwhelming.
It was never going to be a case where he could say, "It's not me, you've got the wrong man."
Burglar turned killer, Vasyl Coulier, has been charged with the murder and attempted murder of Frida and Kenneth Walker in the Derbyshire town of Shirebrook. He's been traced on CCTV close to their home before and after their brutal beating. After Coulier's arrest, evidence seized from his home overwhelmingly links him to the crime scene.
He carried out a really savage attack on this couple. There was no way that Frida was going to survive such a savage assault, and it's really a miracle that Ken didn't die in the same attack. It really was absolutely vile.
In the build-up to his trial, Coulier finally offers his side of the story in a defence statement.
Coulier always admitted that he was the person who went into the house, but he never intended to kill them when he went in there. He just wanted the money.
He was trying to claim that the injuries caused to Frida and Ken were not intentional, that he didn't intend to cause them very serious harm. He offered to plead to manslaughter and wounding to Ken, but that wasn't an acceptable result for this investigation. The evidence was clear and we were going to go to trial for murder.
8 months after the violent attack, Coulier finally faces justice at Derby Crown Court.
He pleaded not guilty to the allegations of murder, attempted murder and causing grievous bodily harm with intent.
With Coulier's victims being pensioners in their late 80s, tensions in the courtroom are running high.
This inevitably was going to attract and did attract a huge amount of media interest from the very outset.
On that morning of the trial, it was packed in there, as you'd imagine. You had all of the national media in there. This was a huge story. This was a couple who were in their 80s who'd been attacked by a man who no one really knew anything about. It was crackling in there, it really was. And I think a lot of that was down to the fact that there was so much interest in this. Far more importantly, the police needed to get some justice.
All eyes are on Coulier as he hears the case against him.
My first impression of him was, isn't he small? Physically, whilst he was relatively well built, he wasn't a large man at all. He was quietly spoken.
He didn't look particularly menacing. He didn't look particularly frightening. He was just a skinny, dark-haired guy who didn't seem like the sort of person that would force his way into the home of a couple and kill one and beat one to within an inch of his life.
It was unbelievable. I would have expected somebody who had committed an offence like that at times just to look down, but no. He just looked in front of him, no emotion whatsoever on his face.
The prosecution paints the profile of a desperate man. On the day of the murder, Coulier is £11,000 in debt.
Having gone to the bookmakers that morning and lost his wages. He needed money, and he needed money for himself, and he needed money to gamble.
So he homed in on Ken and Frida, whom he discovered had £30,000 stashed around their home.
Precisely how Vasile Kulia came to be aware of this remains a mystery.
It was quite well known, certainly amongst a small circle of friends that Ken and Frida trusted, that they kept quite a lot of money in the house.
He said that he had heard about it in general conversation in a Polish store earlier that day. The police were always very sceptical about this, as was I. There were any other number of neighbours that knew about this and could equally, in all innocence, have just mentioned it in passing. Somehow it was information that came Kulia's way, and somehow he managed to put enough information together to give him enough of a location to go and have a look.
The prosecution presents to court their theory on what happened next.
That he'd opened the door to let the cat in or out, and he'd taken his opportunity and forced his way in then.
Then a confrontation took place, as Coulier demanded Ken's cash.
The difficulty was that Ken, who was suffering with dementia, had a habit of not remembering where he put his money, and so the police surmised, and we presented the case at trial, that he grew increasingly angry regarding Ken's inability to remember where the money was.
Police believe Coulier tried to beat Ken and Frida into submission before gagging and tying them up.
No doubt in my mind that Ken and Frida would have wanted to put up a fight against Vasile Kulia, which is what then made him do the most sadistic things that he could.
Frida was tortured to death in the kitchen in front of Ken in the hope that he would give up where the money was.
These people were in their 80s. He was a young man. He didn't need to tie them up. He didn't need to beat them the way he did, all for a sum of money, which he ultimately didn't even achieve in taking with him.
Next, it's Coulier's turn to give his version of events.
When Coulier took the stand, he obviously had to accept that he was present, but he did everything he could to try and minimise any harm that came to Ken and Frida. So he provided an account which effectively relied on self-defence.
Coulier claims he didn't force his way into Ken and Frida's, but snuck in silently and waited for them to go to bed.
He said that where he hid was the downstairs toilet. He was discovered when Frida came into that room, and Frida shouted and started to assault him. And then Ken came to assist Frida, and that's when Ken got his injuries and fell down whilst he was trying to assault Coulier. It was just nonsense.
He tries to explain away Frida's fatal injuries.
It was laughable in places. He claimed to have slipped on a drink that was spilt within the scuffle.
He slipped and fell on Frida as part of the fight that he had with the two of them, because they weren't going to give up their money without a fight. And after that happened, he realised quite what trouble he was in, and so he decided to tie them both up.
But the prosecution blows apart Coulier's claims of self-defence by markings found next to Frida's body.
The forensic scientists gave evidence of directions of blood spots on the skirting board, and there were directions of travel that indicated separate blows into wet blood from different directions. That was then highly suggestive of kicks into wet blood.
This proves Frida was lying defencelessly on the ground when she was pummeled in the head.
Blood pattern analysis experts could interpret the mark to show that Frida had been kicked or stamped on at least 3 times within the kitchen.
And Coulier really comes unstuck on the suffocating coverings found around Frida Walker's face.
Fundamentally, he had to explain how it was that Frida's head had 6 separate sets of wrappings around it. 2 were black bin liners and a ligature in her mouth as well. He said throughout the trial that he was not responsible for that and that he wasn't responsible for gagging Ken either. This was absurd.
But the forensic evidence rips Coulier's claims apart.
His fingerprints were on a roll of bin liners literally inches away from Frida's head. The scientist was able to tell us that the bin liner used to cover Frida's head was the last one to be taken off the roll.
Coulier was trying to distance himself from those head coverings because that was the cause of death.
He could offer no explanation as to how his fingerprints had got onto the roll of bin liners. He was basically saying that when he left, there was no face coverings on.
So clearly someone must have done it after he'd left them. Now, who would walk into a house where a couple are lying, bound and gagged, one dead, the other one dying, and decide, I'm going to put a bag over these people's heads and then I'm going to leave? It begs belief, and it just shows what a liar Coulier is.
After 2 weeks of evidence, the jury retires to consider their verdict.
By the time the evidence finished, and by the time we'd heard Coulier's version of events, the only thought in my mind was how quickly are the jury going to come back with a guilty verdict.
Unfortunately, I couldn't be there on verdict day. I spent a very nervous day, never leaving my phone.
I still can't stand the moment when a jury returns their verdict. It is still a moment, one way or the other, of incredibly high drama and tension.
The jury reappears in just 2 hours.
They convicted Coulier of the murder of Frida Walker and of causing grievous bodily harm with intent to her husband Ken.
Although found not guilty on the attempted murder charge, Coulier's overall conviction is a triumph for the team.
They had no other conclusions that they could bring, so fortunately the right verdict was reached very quickly. A verdict that we were all satisfied and happy with.
3 days later, it's Coulier's sentencing. And Frida's friend, Judith, who made the gruesome discovery of the couple, is called to the stand.
So I wrote a victim impact statement, it was called, and I just wanted to, to read it out really. And it's a terrible thing to think somebody could just do it. I just can't understand it.
Vasile Coulier is jailed for 34 years, with no chance of parole.
I don't think anyone was expecting it to be quite that long, but the long and the short of it is what he deserves for what he did. This was brutal, this was savage, and it deserves this type of tariff.
There was some justice, not just for Ken and Frida, but for Shirebrook as a whole.
But tragically, by the time of the conviction, Ken would never hear the fate of his attacker.
He never recovered enough to realise what had happened to Frida, and he died shortly before the trial, and so never got to fully hear this verdict against Coulier.
And the brutal crime has left its mark on the close-knit community of Shirebrook.
It's not a relief, is it? Because my auntie's still not with me.
Well, he'll never get what he deserves, Never. Say glad it's all over, but it'll never be over.
obviously hoped she would turn up safe and well.
It's such a big lie. Why would he make that up?
It was so horrific. She was very talented, beautiful, and then you question everything.
A con man, a charlatan who was adept at getting sex and money out of women, and who ruins women's lives in order to further his own gains.
The whole thing was shocking because we obviously thought we knew these people, and then all of a sudden you find that you don't actually know anyone at all.
Murders don't happen in sleepy little country villages.
Nestled in the rolling Sussex hills lies the picture postcard village of Duddleswell.
Duddleswell is a small village, nearly the highest point in Sussex.
It's an ancient hunting ground. It's a mixture of some wooded areas and open heathland. We're up quite high, so yeah, it gets the weather.
Duddleswell is in the Ashdown Forest, which is the inspiration for the children's author A.A. Milne and his Winnie the Pooh books.
It's tiny. It's a sort of blink and you miss it. It's sort of a few houses and the tea rooms down the road.
Probably 200 or 300 people, I'd imagine. Probably more sheep and horses than people.
It's close to, say, the city, London. So it's in the middle of everywhere and in the middle of nowhere, to be honest.
The best described as sleepy. In the summer, tourists come through and the tea rooms do a good business, but basically it's a backwater.
There's not a great deal that goes on out here.
But in 2008, something out of the ordinary did happen, and life in this idyllic village changed forever.
Hello, darling. It's me. Wherever you are, just please get in contact.
Local villager David Chenery Wickens is trying to reach his wife Diane, who seems to have disappeared.
I'm at home, wishing you were here with me now.
He reports her missing to the police.
Please, Diane. I'm going frantic here. Please phone me. Love you.
Every missing person case is treated on its own merits. So there will always be circumstances taken into account. Was this usual behaviour? Was there something about the individual that made him or her vulnerable? And according to all of those circumstances, we would grade a missing person either as high, medium or low risk. With Diane, it wouldn't necessarily have been treated as a high-risk missing person and wouldn't have garnered as many resources as perhaps somebody else would have done.
There must be hundreds of missing people in Sussex, and they crop up from time to time. Often there's a very innocent explanation. Often somebody disappears because they want to disappear and try a new life elsewhere.
News of Diane's disappearance shocks the local community, where she's a popular villager.
Diane was very pretty and very, very articulate, very well spoken and very interesting.
Lovely, really lovely, quite quiet.
But the rather reserved Diane hides a high-flying, glittering career, bringing a spot of Tinseltown to the Sussex backwater.
Diane was a hugely popular, super talented makeup artist for the BBC. She had won an Emmy, which is the top American award for television. She'd been nominated for a BAFTA, which is the British equivalent. And she'd worked on hugely prestigious series such as Pride and Prejudice, Casualty, League of Gentlemen. She was multi-skilled, and here she was at the midst of her stellar career.
It's husband David, though, who seems to attract the spotlight.
He was quite an imposing character, quite quite gregarious, quite larger than life. I think David was the dominant partner, a lot more outgoing.
He's also a star in the kitchen, where he volunteers at the nearby railway centre, the Lavender Line.
Very good cook, dished it up very nicely as well. Was charming to the customers, very pleasant, easy-going person.
David's other talents are otherworldly. He's an accredited spiritualist who prays with like-minded souls in the local community.
Our first meeting, he was our medium for the evening and took the service for us. He was very, very pleasant, very professional.
He did style himself very much as a reverend. David frequently appeared in the pub with his dog collar on. We didn't see him very much not in his dog collar.
Seemed to be no end to his talents. They just seemed a lovely couple. They got along well with nearly everybody, it would seem. They always seemed very normal, just normal.
Police delve into Diane's seemingly normal life. Then 6 days after her disappearance, appeals are made for her whereabouts in the local press.
Living in Sussex as I do, when the alarm went out that there was a missing person, this is not unusual in any part of the country, but the person who was missing was very unusual. To have such a super talented makeup artist at the BBC suddenly disappear seemingly off the face of the earth was a very good story.
Sometimes there will be an investigation which causes concern, which does hit the media interest and the public interest. Diane would have been one of them because it was so out of character. No obvious reasons for Diane to have disappeared. So that type of investigation would have gathered a lot of public and a lot of media interest.
The national media descends on this quiet Sussex backwater.
The first time I heard about Diane going missing was when I just came indoors with my husband and the front door knocked and there was a newspaper reporter telling us that Diane had gone missing, and it really upset us.
It was everywhere that she'd gone missing. It was in the local news, it was on the radio that she was missing. It was, everyone was talking about it.
From that point onwards, there was a great deal of interest in the community. It did become a point of conversation very quickly.
A lot of the things that people were saying was that they just thought that she'd gone away, left him.
Her devastated husband, David, confides he fears the same.
He thought that's what she'd done and that she'd gone to London. I do remember hearing that a few times from a few different sources, that she'd gone to London, but no one actually knew where she was, which was strange.
Detectives dig deeper into Diane's last known movements.
Chenry Wickens claimed to the police they had both taken the train from East Grinstead Station up to London because Diane had a pre-arranged meeting at the BBC. And they agreed to meet afterwards at her hairdresser's. And Chenry Wickens told the police that he was there at the rendezvous and she didn't turn up.
Diane's mobile is traced to London on the day she disappeared. But something in her phone records doesn't seem right.
Text messages had been sent from Diane's phone to some of her friends. Now, this was an immediate matter of suspicion to the police, because if someone had deliberately gone missing in order to start a new life somewhere else, they would not contact friends in this way. So was this some sort of pretext to try and send the Sussex police off on a wild goose chase?
More suspicious was the fact her messages were signed Di, not her usual sign-off, Diane. Police suspect someone else could be using Diane's phone. And there's an unexplained mystery about her last known location.
The police established that there had been no pre-arranged meeting at the BBC, so she had no reason to go there.
Detectives need to trace where Diane went after saying her goodbyes to David at Kensington Station. So they scour the CCTV.
Ideally, the CCTV would start to be reviewed from the point that the two separated. So that would be the start point. Where did Diane go? Did she meet somebody else? Can we track her through Shepherd's Bush, White City and what have you?
They started going through all the CCTV footage and they couldn't find her anywhere.
Actually, Diane was never in Shepherd's Bush. And at that point, you would start working backwards along her journey.
Police tried to trace Diane to where the couple's journey began.
They also had CCTV taken at East Grinstead railway station showing Chenry Wickens getting on the train alone. No sign of his wife.
It's such a big lie and so easily disprovable. Why would he make that up?
Duddleswell, East Sussex. Spiritualist David Chenery Wickens has been arrested and questioned about his wife's disappearance. He claims Diane accompanied him to London for a meeting. But CCTV shows him making the trip alone.
The police may well have had deep reservations about Chenery Wickens. They knew that there had been no pre-arranged meeting at the BBC, so there was no reason why she would have gone there.
A search starts at the couple's cottage, but this leads to a dead end. So detectives turn back to the CCTV.
When they confronted Chenery Wickens with the CCTV, which proved that he had lied in his explanation, he immediately apologised and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, yes, I did lie to you then, but that's because I was embarrassed because my wife decided that she was going to leave me, that she was so ashamed of our debts and so ashamed that our marriage was failing that she decided to leave me. So I invented this story. Terribly sorry."
Once he'd been arrested, it was big news locally, and the local paper was all over it. When we went out with David and Diane down to the pub, it was good fun. There's no signs of any issues. And then when you actually find out that something like this has happened, it's like a shock, particularly from a sleepy community of a few hundred people in a fairly affluent area. You just don't expect it.
Once his wife had suddenly gone missing, they thought, maybe he has something to do with this.
But with no firm proof David's behind the disappearance, 4 days after his arrest, he's released.
David was bailed pending the investigation. Effectively, what you had here was a no-body murder investigation. Clearly, the police suspected that Diane was dead because the arrest was made and he had been arrested on suspicion of that. Proving that a murder occurred and that David was responsible without a body would have been incredibly difficult.
The police were in a quandary. They could not prove that she had not left him and had disappeared wanting to start a new life. It was impossible to prove something like that or disprove something like that.
The police need to have control, and sometimes that's giving somebody enough rope, if you like, to hang themselves. Sometimes that control is sitting back and watching what happens. So that control is sometimes just space.
Police had to step up inquiries around the village and spreading in a circle outwards in a sort of search. But it's such a rural area, it's such a massive amount of land to cover, it was virtually an impossible task. And with a manpower shortage that Sussex Police had at that time, it was not the best use of the time. It really turned into a waiting game.
Detectives put the couple's marriage under the microscope. They speak to friends, family and acquaintances, trawling way back to when Diane and David first met. And they discover the respectable spiritualist Reverend isn't what he seems.
It seems that Chenery was working as a driver in a delivery company, and amongst his routes was to deliver to the BBC. So it seems likely that this is how they met, and he had at that time some skill or interest in reading tarot cards. And it may well be that this is how they first met, and that she then fell under his spell. She'd had a previous boyfriend, which was very emotionally disturbing breakup, so she was in a very vulnerable state when she met Chenery, and they embarked on this whirlwind romance. He was slightly older than her, that she could trust as a rock in her life. Within a matter of weeks of her meeting Chenery, she had moved Chenery into her Battersea flat. Now, he arrived with all his worldly goods and possessions in a carrier bag. To move into a nice Battersea flat was clearly an upgrade on anything he'd had before. That was the moment, I think, that he decided that Diane was a keeper.
And in no time, the couple decide to tie the knot.
There were huge red flags flying all around the wedding and the day of the wedding in the eyes of Diane's family. First, when they found out that he had arrived and moved in with just a carrier bag's worth of his worldly goods, which suggested he must have a dubious past, shall we say, to say the least. Secondly, he couldn't find a single man to be best man. He had no male friends that he was willing to put forward. And so one of Diane's friends had to step in.
By the time they make the move to Duddleswell, the ex-lorry driver David has been enjoying his newfound wealth with Diane.
She had the financial input into the relationship. It was certainly her money that kept the house, kept the cars, and I think financially he contributed very little to the relationship. His relationship with Diane, even though they were married, there was a side to his relationship that she was completely unaware of.
Detectives discover Chenery Wickens has been leading a double life. By using his spiritualist charm, he's been exploiting a string of other women too.
He was a very plausible, charming man, particularly as he had joined the United Spiritualist Church, gained accreditation through them, and had taken to wearing a dog collar and calling himself Reverend. He claims that he could communicate with the dead through, apparently, a Native American spirit called Wild Fox. And there were many women, emotionally vulnerable, recently bereaved, who were ready to believe him. An opera singer, Chenery Wickens, had wanted £21,000 from her, claiming that he had prostate cancer. Well, he didn't. Secondly, an alternate therapist said that Chenery Wickens had told her that she should lend him money because he was going to divorce his wife and sell the house. Well, he didn't do that either. There was a whole series of cons that he had carried out, often at a time when he was also having sex with these women.
Marlene Thompson started up a local spiritualist group with Chenery Wickens, but it wasn't long before she too began to question his motives.
At some point, he asked every one of us what the value of our houses were, and he seems to pick on people, especially ladies, who have confided in him with problems within their marriage. Probably just after a year of us all meeting, everybody was beginning to fall out with each other. I did know that David was having affairs with several different girls at one time. He kept it pretty quiet. I knew because the girls confided in me what was going on.
Chenery Wickens even targeted Marlene.
David did ask me to have an affair with him. I was very tempted at that particular time because my marriage was a bit iffy at that particular time. It's strained, and it is that when David knows that there's a bit of problems, when women are vulnerable, that's when he takes advantage of them. I was quite infatuated, I suppose, because he was 5 years younger, but I couldn't do that to my husband.
And to achieve his aims, the so-called respectable reverend seems happy to lie about his own marriage.
David told us all that he was divorced from Diane anyway, that she was a horrible person, she was very vicious, and they had got divorced. We discovered that he wasn't divorced, he was lying to us. With all the lying and the way he was talking of Diane, I decided then that Circle had to close.
After speaking to his work pals at the Heritage Railway, the Lavender Line, detectives discover David's been spinning the same yarns.
He had been quite clear, as far as we knew, that his marriage was at an end. We knew he was still living with Diane, but as far as we knew, they were living, albeit in the same house, living apart. And as far as he told us, the marriage was ended, and she knew that.
He was talking about selling his house. So he's going to have to sell the house because him and his wife were splitting up.
But as far as Diane was concerned, they were happily married. Her husband explained the periods away from home womanising as time spent caring for his son, who had a brain injury. Detectives discover this is also a big lie.
Diane chose, consciously or otherwise, to turn a blind eye. She stayed loyal, she stayed over-trusting, and she let him get on with whatever he wanted to do.
After Diane's disappearance, her husband's lies show no sign of abating. Whilst out on bail, he keeps changing his story.
He kept saying that she had left him and had gone to Spain and she was going to stay there, live there. So that's how he explained why she was missing.
Obviously for him to come up with she's gone off to Spain, when he had already said they'd gone off to London together for a meeting on the train, and she hadn't come back afterwards. It obviously began to make people think this chap is not telling the truth. Certainly the people on the Lavender Line had their own sinister theories about it.
Lying is an art form. It really is. You need to know what you said to different people at different times about different things. And it's incredibly difficult to keep that going for any period of time. But being proven a liar only proves you're a liar, does not prove you're a killer.
But 4 months after Diane's disappearance, just a stone's throw from the end of the Lavender Line, a dog walker makes a gruesome discovery.
Decomposed human remains were found yesterday in East Sussex.
No longer a missing persons inquiry. This was a full-blown murder inquiry.
Diane Chenery Wickens was reported missing by her husband on January the 24th this year.
4 months after Diane vanished, a body is uncovered in undergrowth, 10 miles from the family home. Diane's husband David has been exposed as a cheat and fraud. He's the prime suspect behind her disappearance.
A woman dog walker made a gruesome discovery, but very close to the Lavender Line where Chenery Wickens had worked.
Forensic investigators inspect the crime scene. Local farmer Michael Fordham arrives soon after.
We'd arranged to come and cut our crops with the combine harvester. We arrived at the entrance on the A26 to be met by the police cordon saying road shut, keep out. There were police vehicles everywhere. I believe there was tents and people in white coats. So yes, it was all very intensive police investigation. The body, I believe, was found in this wooded area underneath these big trees. So not too far away from anybody, but when the undergrowth in July is all up and growing, very difficult to see, and therefore the reason why she wasn't found for such a long time.
The body's later identified as that of Diane Chenery Wickens. Her missing person case is now officially a murder inquiry.
To have one and a body found in a field boundary here was quite shocking, really, and quite horrific. And this is a quiet hamlet. Don't expect a murder, but that's a sad fact of life.
It's the news that Duddleswell and beyond is dreading.
Just shock, I think. Just couldn't believe it. Just felt very sorry for her.
It was so horrific. She was very talented, beautiful. Just, you can't imagine something like that happening, and then you question everything.
We all obviously hoped that Diane would turn up safe and well in some way, so it was very shocking to find out that this lady had apparently been brutally murdered.
The discovery of the body suddenly propelled the entire case back into the headlines. A multi-talented BBC makeup artist murdered in a remote location and a wonderful idyllic country village backdrop. It was a perfect copy for the newspapers.
Meanwhile, scenes of crime officers are on the hunt for the tiniest of clues that will link Diane to her killer.
And you absolutely cannot rush forensic recovery because you only get the one opportunity. You're now looking at what evidence can Diane still give us, what evidence can we gather from the environment in which she was found, and how does that relate to our suspect?
No attempt had been made to dig even the shallowest of graves. She had just been discarded in undergrowth. So wildlife had got to her, and of course 4 months of decomposition meant that a pathologist had no chance of finding out the cause of death, how she had died. There were other fascinating quirks to the discovery. Diane's wedding ring and eternity ring were missing from her left hand.
They're very personal things to happen. And although not necessarily direct evidence as such, would tend to indicate that somebody who knew her was involved in her death.
And there's another bizarre twist to Diane's discovery.
So alongside the corpse was Diane's very distinctive cowboy boots. And the police had to ask themselves, would a stranger make such a seemingly significant gesture as this?
Whoever placed them had left the stretching devices to ensure that the boot kept its shape. They were still in situ, so clearly Diane hadn't worn them there.
Now, there was no way a stranger or a random attacker could have found these boots with these shoe stretchers still inside them. It had to come from someone who had access to the house and to the bedroom. This was a serious mistake made by the killer.
So it certainly changes the nature of the whole investigation.
The finger of suspicion points firmly towards Diane's husband, David. the only other person with access to their marital home. With the body found just a quarter of a mile from the Lavender Line, his volunteer work there also puts him in the frame.
It's so unusual for a killer to dispose of a body in a place they don't know. You will almost always find a connection from the killer back to the location of a body.
David Chenery Wickens is rearrested immediately.
The husband of an Emmy Award-winning makeup artist faces further questioning by police today.
The shockwaves were all around the fact that David had become a member of the railway, had become part of the village community to that extent, had become a ordinary Joe in the pub, and that suddenly we have very good grounds now as villagers to believe that he was not what we thought.
Wouldn't have thought he'd be capable of doing it or anything. You know, totally out of character. I think there was a certain amount of shock. Really, you know, do I know this person?
Forensic teams once again pore over the couple's cottage.
The home address would have been considered primarily as a crime scene itself, and then secondary as a source of intelligence about where Diane had been, what happened to her, and to prove or disprove David's involvement as the killer.
Hidden in a small wooden box, officers uncover Diane's missing wedding and eternity rings. They're sent off to the forensics lab, and the results are incriminating.
The police were able to establish that the rings had minute traces of blood on them, and what's more, clear evidence that they'd been ripped from the fingers of the owner.
The forensic examination of Diane's jewellery was useful because it showed that she was wearing the jewellery when she was bleeding. But it certainly adds that little bit of evidence, that weight of evidence to say she was alive when she was wearing that jewellery and had suffered an attack.
As the rings were never found on the first top-to-bottom search of the home, police suspect David returned to his dead wife's body to retrieve them.
The sheer callousness of Chenery Wickens could be seen in the way that he'd clearly ripped rings from his dead wife's fingers, rings that she never ever took off, according to friends.
Investigators soon uncover the killer's plans for his wife's precious rings.
The missing rings from the fingers was set the police in motion immediately to go and make inquiries at local jewellery shops and pawnbrokers. And it wasn't long before the police found CCTV at a pawn shop showing Chenery Wickens trying to pawn some of his wife's jewellery. The fact that Chenery Wickens was able to pawn it for a mere measly £100 or so shows the depths of depravity and deceit that this man was capable of.
Over time, many more of the Reverend's sordid affairs come crawling out of the woodwork.
So the confirmation that Diane had been murdered ran through the village like a shock bolt. And those women who had known and had, particularly those who had sexual relations with Chenery Wickens, were now coming forward, having realised that the man who they had trusted and had been taken in by and comforted by was potentially a murderer. And a huge body of evidence quickly emerged for the police.
One ex-lover tells police of a very sinister phone call.
Very close to around the time that Diane disappeared, David spoke to an ex-girlfriend asking how you clean up blood.
Her first reaction was, well, how on earth did you get bloodstains on your carpet? To which she replied, oh, I had a terrible nosebleed. Well, at that time, she had no reason to disbelieve him, however implausible that may have sounded.
He was advised to use salt. That type of evidence doesn't show David as a killer. It shows him making a phone call about how to clear up blood. It's when you start putting all of this evidence together, this very strong circumstantial evidence together, that begins to take things beyond reasonable doubt.
David Chenery Wickens appears in court charged with Diane's killing. And a date is set for him to stand trial.
This was crucial evidence for the police, taking the case beyond suspicions that Chenery Wickens was a conman, a charlatan who was adept at getting sex and money out of women, to evidence of Chenery Wickens being a potential murderer.
In Duddleswell, East Sussex, the spiritualist and charlatan David Chenery Wickens has been charged with the murder of his wife Diane. 8 months after her remains were found, her husband finally stands trial at Lewes Crown Court.
Chenery Wickens, despite the mountain of evidence against him, insisted on his innocence and pleaded not guilty to murder.
Individuals will have many different reasons for pleading not guilty. Some because they're clasping at anything to not be convicted. I think in David's case it was just, I don't want to be caught for this.
Court reporter Paul Cheston is there to see the spiritualist led into the dock.
I was at the trial for certain days. Throughout I sensed that Chenery Wickens was confident that he was going to get away with this case. He didn't seem worried by the amount of evidence that the police and the prosecution had assembled. It was very much a circumstantial case because no one had seen him obviously kill his wife or even dump the body. But even circumstantial cases can be very strong cases, and this was one.
Some people will go to court absolutely convinced that they are able to persuade a jury that there is enough doubt that they cannot be convicted. They have a warped sense of their own abilities. They have a warped sense of what did happen.
But the prosecution lays out the events leading to the night of Diane's murder. The day that she uncovers some home truths about her husband.
He was spending quicker than she was earning, and the debts were up to something like £17,000, and the shadow of the bailiffs was cast across their front door. She was getting very concerned. And when she found an itemised phone bill which showed not only the number of times that her husband was phoning various mistresses, but also the huge amount of money he was spending on gay chat rooms, and suddenly the worm turned.
It's believed Diane threatened to end their marriage. And the fake reverend responded with rage.
This was the moment when Chenery Wickens realised that she was worth more to him dead, when he could now sell the house and live the life he wanted to do, inheriting her estate, than alive, when all he had to look forward to was being thrown out of the house and a messy divorce.
Diane was a means to an end for him. And when his whole lifestyle was threatened, that's when Diane died.
Chenery Wickens murdered his wife as a spontaneous explosion of violence.
Though Diane's remains can't confirm how she died, the prosecution reveals the panicked call David makes to his mistress, asking how to clear up blood. After dumping Diane's body near his workplace, he then calculatingly leaves a message on her phone.
Wherever you are, just please get in contact.
As she lay dead.
Please, Diane. I'm going frantic here. Please phone me. Love you.
But the mask slips when the court hears from women and men who were invited over by Chenery Wickens for sex immediately after Diane's murder.
We came to know that he had a voracious sexual appetite. The prosecution's case was made up almost entirely with women who had been seduced by Chenery Wickens, whether for money or for sexual favours, who came forward and really gave a detailed picture of what this charlatan was like, with revealing insights. They gave evidence against him, some anonymously and others using their name.
Next, it's the Reverend's turn to take to the stand.
Chenery Wickens himself looked straight at the jury and told them about his great spiritualist beliefs and that he was a man of God. He laughed at the suggestion that he could be a murderer. He said that his beliefs and those of the church forbade any ill thoughts of or words or deeds, let alone a murder. And as a reverend in this church, he knew what would be waiting for him, presumably on the other side, should he ever do such a thing.
Now, he will explain to the jury, I had nothing to do with it, but I am the victim. And quite often when people take the stand, that's how they try and portray themselves, as the victim.
He tried to blackguard Diane's name by claiming that she was the one who was having all the affairs and not himself. He came up with a bizarre suggestion that Diane had not been murdered at all. She had taken her own life, that she had committed suicide because of the shame that she felt because of the mounting debts and because of their failed marriage.
But under cross-examination by the prosecution QC, the cool Chenery Wickens begins to crack.
By taunting him in the witness box, pressurising him, he was able to show Chenery Wickens losing his temper. And I'm sure this is when the jury thought, that's what happened that night. He lost his temper and he hit his wife.
Following a trial lasting more than a month, Chenery Wickens finally faces justice.
The jury were not taken in by any of the lies and charm and bluster from Chenery Wickens in the witness box and returned a unanimous verdict of guilty to murder.
The fake reverend is jailed for life, with a minimum of 18 years. Outside court, Diane's family responds to the verdict.
It wipes out once and for all the many lies that have been told about Diane, and it removes a dangerous, predatory charlatan from society.
The family never found out exactly how Diane died. The lack of remorse and the not guilty plea, I think, were all sentencing factors.
Diane's brutal killing has ever since haunted her village of Duddleswell and beyond.
You don't expect to have these sorts of incidents like this, and the shock waves that run through small communities like this are huge.
I wished I'd never met the man. I would never believe another word he said.
The whole thing was shocking because we obviously thought we knew these people, and then all of a sudden you find that you don't actually know anyone at all.
Murders don't happen in sleepy little country villages. To think that a husband can kill a wife, of years of marriage dissipated at a drop of a hat, it's a truly shocking image.
It was like an out-of-body experience. I tried to turn him over and I was scared of what I was going to see.
He was found located in a pool of blood. He'd suffered a horrendous amount of injuries throughout his body.
This sort of thing doesn't happen in our little village, you know. Everybody couldn't believe it had happened, a murder in our village. No.
takes a man who has a lot of hatred in them to do that to him.
He was very cunning, very cunning. He'd always tell you half the story.
It was an act of deceit. It was clear that this was a murder that had been motivated by greed.
On the western fringes of Shropshire lies the tiny village of Halfway House.
Shropshire's a massive county, very rural, and Halfway House is a typical Shropshire hamlet of around 900 people.
It's a really peaceful place. So, I mean, I open my front door and it's just, the only thing I'll see is cows. Yeah, I love it.
Halfway House, it's a very cute village. It's very calm, tranquil. A lot of the people around there they know each other. They know everyone's business, quite frankly. It's a cute place to be.
Everyone's really good to each other. Everyone does look out for each other. The best way to describe it would probably what you'd see on Postman Pat when you were growing up, when he was around delivering his mail, and it's a real village, close-knit community.
It's a popular pit stop for holidaymakers travelling to the Welsh coast. And here you find Tony's Diner, owned and run by 67-year-old Satnam Singh Bluga.
Everyone really called him Mr. B. We all had difficulty pronouncing the second name, and he was well liked. Larger than life, I would say.
You'd walk in the cafe or in the takeaway, and the first thing, big smile on his face and a massive handshake. He used to greet everybody who come in there.
But becoming the diner's owner wasn't an easy journey for Satnam Singh Bluga.
Originally a taxi driver in Delhi, wanted to create a better life for himself. When he'd come over, he started working in the hotels and restaurants. My dad always had this dream. He wanted a fish and chip shop business of his own. I remember when we pulled up at the diner, this huge 96-seater restaurant, his eyes lit up and he knew this was the one that he was looking for. As his son, I was the center of his universe, but I know for a fact he loved that diner just that little bit more than any of us, for put his heart and soul into it.
After 14 years of hard graft, it's a thriving business.
He worked at 7 in the morning till 10, 11 at night. We had a 20-foot menu. We did everything from fish and chips to sirloin steak to curries to roast dinners to pizzas. The menu was absolutely huge. You used to watch him making the pizzas and he was such a show-off. He would get the dough and he'd throw it up into the air and he'd catch it and flip it round. I think some of the people just used to come to watch the show of him flipping the pizza. I think everyone just treated it like the hub of the community, and they'd get to meet each other.
But life at the diner and in the village will never be the same.
Monday the 26th of June was a typical summer's day. It was the one day in the week that the diner was closed. And on that day, a delivery driver arrived. And the idea was that he would provide all of the stuff that they needed for the week ahead. When he turned up, he couldn't get a response.
Goes next door to the post office to ask if there's a key available for him to go into the diner to drop the delivery off. The postmistress there doesn't have a key, so she then therefore attempts to make contact with Harry.
I remember my wife calling me around 3:15 and saying, "Dad's car's here. The windows are all open, but there's no sign of Dad."
Monday is Mr. B's one day off, but he should be at home above the diner. so his son rushes back.
Come home, put my key in the door, walk straight up the stairs, right down to his bedroom, and I'm banging on the door, and he's not answering, and I keep banging on the door, and time passes on, and there's still no answer.
Harry makes his way downstairs into the main diner.
Got a swing door into the kitchen, and instantly I can see in my mind what is just a spillage of some sort. I push the door open, and it's dark in the kitchen, and I can just see this spillage, and it's going across the ground. What I initially thought was just a spillage was a streak of blood. And then I hit the switch of the kitchen lights, and I see my dad face down. And I just remember screaming out and calling out to him. I don't know why. I think I already knew then that I wasn't expecting a response, and I went over to him and tried to turn him over. He had these just two big circles around his eyes and some injuries to the side of his face. I could see some stab wounds in his back, but I just remember touching him, putting my hand on his back, and just feeling absolutely cold.
In a panic, Harry dials 999.
And I remember ringing them and just telling them to get there quick. And they said, look, we want you to try and resuscitate him. I could see that there was no sign of life, and the operator kept screaming on the phone, you have to turn him over, you have to turn him over, give him CPR. And I just kept saying to her, I can't do it, because I'd seen the injuries when I tried to turn him over, and I was scared of what I was going to see.
So Harry summons help from a neighbour next door.
She come through the door, and I remember her first words just were like, oh God, and she took the phone from me and eventually saying to the operator, look, there's no point. To which the operator finally gave up.
West Mercia police and paramedics race straight to the diner.
Ambulance contact police to say that they are en route to a male that's been described as being assaulted and has suffered a lot of blood loss. Uniform officers initially respond to it, and upon their attendance they speak with the paramedics, and they establish that Satnam is unfortunately deceased. Once they're satisfied that there's nobody else in the premises, they then secure it for later examination by scene to crime officers and detectives.
DCI Mark Bellamy is the senior investigating officer on call. Soon he arrives on the scene.
Satnam was found located in a pool of blood. It was obvious that he'd suffered a horrendous amount of injuries throughout his body, causing significant blood loss. The offender, in an attempt to hide his body, had then dragged him from the initial point of where the assault had taken place to a point in the kitchen where he couldn't be easily located. Obviously at this time, Harry is extremely upset. It's clear that Satnam has been dead for a number of hours, and performing CPR was a pointless exercise.
It's like an out-of-body experience. It's like a dream or a nightmare or something. I think not until the point where the paramedics come and the police arrive and I sit down and eventually take a glass of water just to drink. And I remember having this burning feeling in my stomach. I just felt sick and still can't comprehend what's actually unfolded in front of you.
The police now launch a murder investigation.
The first thing the police would have been thinking was, is this a robbery motive, or is there some other reason behind it?
There were a few things that were causing me a little bit of concern. The fact that the upstairs window was wide open. Was this a burglary that had gone wrong? Or was it something as simple as something closer to home?
They'd want to know who was working there. They'd want to figure out who the witnesses might be, who had come, who had gone. So they asked lots of questions, including, who were the employees and where were they now?
Soon it becomes apparent that 2 members of Mr. B's live-in staff are mysteriously missing.
I've got to build up a picture around what have they done, where are they? Is it an innocence, absence, or is there something more sinister to it?
I was driving home from work and I've never seen so many police cars. There must have been 12 or 13 of them. A couple of ambulances there, all the lights still going. I thought, God, what's happened, you know? Phoned Mr. B up. This was on the Monday, because I'd go for a pint with him on a Monday night. I was supposed to meet him for a drink.
Mark keeps on trying, but his friend isn't picking up.
I went up the pub at the halfway house just to talk to a few locals to see if anybody knew anything, because I was a bit worried actually, you know, and nobody knew anything. Maybe at about an hour later, a couple of his relatives come up and they actually asked for me. I said, what's happening? I said, what's happened to Mr. B? And then he said to me, Mr. B is deceased. I nearly fell over. I must have turned a whiter shade of pale, you know, and because then I couldn't speak for a bit. I thought, I went outside, I thought, I can't believe this, you know.
Then people started talking and they had rumours, and I believe that they had told me it'd been a stabbing.
We knew something had gone wrong. It became knowledgeable that somebody actually had died. We didn't know what they'd died of, how they'd died. We just knew somebody had been found dead at the diner.
I went back inside and I just gathered a few of the locals together and said, I've got to tell you something, Mr. B's been murdered, you know, he's dead. It's horrendous, it was, you know. God, I've never heard a busy pub go so quiet in all my life. Never. This sort of thing doesn't happen in our little village, you know. I think it really shook the village to the core. You know, everybody, it just couldn't believe it had happened. A murder in our village, like, you know, no.
It was almost eerily quiet in the pub. People were taken aback. They were a bit shaken about it. So we chose to just close the doors, lock up, double check the locks. The shock in the community meant that people were more, they wanted to be at home. They wanted to be secure and safe. I also think they were just shocked and saddened at the death of Mr. B, and kind of sitting in a pub doesn't quite sit right when someone's lost their life the way he did.
Following the stabbing at Satnam Singh Bluga's diner, detectives from West Mercia Police are trying to find witnesses and potential suspects.
The priority of the police, of course, in that golden hour is to collect any evidence that might lead them to whoever was responsible. So they were looking for weapons, for knives, anything that they could get DNA off, or fingerprints to prove who the killer might be. They would make inquiries to see who was in the scene at the time and whether they were still there or they'd left.
Meanwhile, detectives question Mr. B's son Harry about his father's last movements.
Inquiries were being made in the background in order for me to satisfy myself that Harry wasn't involved. We were able to do that very quickly, and we were then sought to sort of build up that picture around Satnam's life in the last 24 hours.
I remember sitting there with the inspector and it was just everything came out.
Police learn all's not been well. behind the scenes at the much-loved diner.
Mr. B was known as a bit of a Gordon Ramsay, I think, because he was a no-nonsense person. People might have described him as being harsh. He liked the job to be done and done in a particular way.
Because he was hard-working, he also had high standards, and at times he wasn't afraid to let people know when he thought that they weren't meeting his high standards.
There'd been a couple of fallings outs with some of the staff. Someone had had too much to drink and things had got out of hand.
No one seems to know what that was about, but the end result was there was some kind of violence and tables and chairs got broken in the diner. To this day, I don't think his son Harry ever got to the bottom of that, but it left him quite concerned about the types of people that Mr. B would sometimes employ.
Some of these staff were struggling immigrants, just as Mr. B once was.
To show you the measure of the kind of man that he was, from time to time he offered work to people who came from the same part of India that he came from Punjab, and from time to time he would offer them accommodation. So he lived at the diner and he also had rooms where staff could stay.
His phone would go off. Brother, I've been here X amount of time. I really need a job. Can you help me out? He'd come over as an immigrant himself. He was always looking for someone to rescue, and maybe he's seen a bit of himself in these people, and that's why he employed them when he did.
But Harry didn't see eye to eye with his dad.
My argument was there's no background checks. You can't obtain a reference, and you're employing people that you don't know nothing about, and you guys are all living under one roof together. And I would say to my wife, one day something's going to happen, I just can't explain it. I knew something was going to go south.
Soon, detectives learn of a sinister event. Just the day before Mr. B's found dead.
A local customer had been in the diner on the Sunday and overheard an argument coming from the back around the kitchen area, and this witness told the police that he couldn't understand the language, but they realised it was an Asian language and realised that there was a loud raised voices, a row between two people.
By now, police have identified the two missing staff who work in Mr. B's kitchen and live above the diner. 58-year-old Belkar Singh and 30-year-old Ram G, otherwise known as Romy, who police immediately home in on.
He was young, he was fit, he was strong, and on the face of it, given the number of injuries sustained by Mr. B, it looked likely that he might be the candidate for the murder.
But Mr. B's killing is shocking news to Romy.
My friend, he rang me and he said, that's happened, Mr. B is, his body is in kitchen and he died, And I'm shaking all on that time, I remember. So my all is shaking, I'm shaking, panic, I just, how can I tell you? He is good boss. He's treat me like grandkids.
Romy returns to Halfway House, where he's questioned by police.
And he take my all statement around 4 hours. He take my all clothes, my phone, everything, I still remember. And next day, he take me in the police station, and over there, I gave all statement, whatever,
Romy, though, has a cast iron alibi for his whereabouts in the last 24 hours.
With Romy, it was really easy to get identify where he was. He was very open in his account with us. told us that he'd gone to Leicestershire for a music concert. We could quite easily corroborate that account through financial and through intelligence inquiries.
It became clearer every minute to the police that Romy simply couldn't have done it. The one person who was missing and unaccounted for was Belkar Singh.
Another staff member reveals more to police about Belkar Singh's movements on Sunday the 25th of June, the day before the body was found.
We know from the female worker that Romy had left about 20 to 3. She'd finished her duties just before 9 p.m. and then left. So she was able to tell us that Belkar Singh was left alone at 9 p.m. with Mr. B.
She'd seen Mr. B cashing up. He then waved her goodbye, and she said to him, "Have a lovely day off with your granddaughters." She was the last person, apart from Belkar Singh, who had seen him alive.
So detectives seized the diner's CCTV, putting Belkar Singh's every step under the microscope.
From reviewing the CCTV, we could see that just before 5:20 in the morning, Belkar goes towards the skips and he appears to deposit something in there. And then within 5 minutes, the refuse company is turning up and emptying the skips. That sort of starts to get, adds to my suspicions. And then we know at 6 o'clock he's getting into a taxi and he's dragging behind him a huge suitcase.
Police need to urgently identify what Belkar Singh disposed of and why the worker who rarely leaves the diner is making such a hasty escape.
All roads seemed to be leading to Belkar Singh. He was someone whose whole life revolved around that restaurant, and for him to just disappear like that was deeply suspicious.
Belkar Singh was nominated by myself as a suspect on the night of Monday the 26th of June. Therefore, we're then starting to focus down onto him in order to locate him, in order to try and establish why he's disappeared.
By a process of elimination, the spotlight fell on Belkar Singh, and now that he'd gone, the hunt started for him.
Halfway House, Shropshire. Restaurant owner 67-year-old Satnam Singh Bluga, known locally as Mr. B, has been found brutally stabbed in the kitchen of his diner.
There were in the region of 65 wounds inflicted to Mr. B by the means of a sharp-edged weapon. I just cannot understand what would go through someone's head who'd want to inflict that level of injury on somebody.
A manhunt is underway for Mr. B's employee, Belkar Singh, who's mysteriously disappeared hours before the body was found.
There was no apparent reason for Belkar to get into a taxi at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Monday on his day off.
But suddenly contact is made, with the prime suspect himself, by his fellow kitchen worker, Romy.
Given that Belkar Singh had disappeared literally into the night without a trace, everyone was concerned to know where he'd gone. Romy made a call to him.
I tried to ring few times and he not answer, and finally around 7 o'clock he answered.
During the phone conversation between Romy and Belkar, Romy discloses that Mr. B is dead.
He said, "Really? This is his reaction, that's it."
He didn't express any surprise to Romy, which immediately started to raise some concerns with Romy and his partner, and she took the decision to actually record the phone conversation.
Singh also makes dubious claims about Mr. B's movements the night before, the last time he was seen alive with the suspect.
He said to me, "Mr. B is going pub night time, and he eat food and then he sleep. Mr. Singh lying, Mr. B going to pub, blah blah blah. We normally just going Monday, because Monday we have day off. Mr. B never ever going pub without me."
He's given an account which doesn't really tie in with what we know around what Mr. B would do. He's saying that Mr. B went to the pub on a Sunday. That didn't happen. Mr. B would go to the pub on a Monday. So we're starting to doubt the accuracy of what Belcar is telling people.
He was very cunning. He'd always tell you half the story. Even on his day off, where are you going today? If he was going north, he'd tell you he's going south. And you couldn't trust him. So obviously, all of my attention and all my suspicion went to him. That could be the only person that was with my father that night.
As police work round the clock to hunt down their suspect, they manage to trace the taxi that picked Singh up, with a large suitcase.
From a subsequent statement given by the taxi driver, Mr. Singh was dropped off at Hilltop at West Bromwich, many miles away from Halfway House. The taxi driver recalls that he went to the bus stop, he noticed that he was looking at the timetables, and the taxi driver drove off, returned to Shropshire, leaving him there.
So we're then trying to utilise the CCTV cameras to track his movements. And from there we can see that he's gone into the shop and he's bought a top-up for his mobile phone. And there are other CCTV opportunities that allow us to track him onto a bus. And from there we were able to establish that he's gone towards the Handsworth area.
Mr. Singh had got family and friends in the Handsworth area of Birmingham. It wouldn't have taken them very long at all to track Mr. Singh.
We know that Belcar had a phone with him and that we were able to track the mobile phone. Officers are dispatched, and we're fortunate that on the Tuesday morning we're able to identify Belcar leaving an address in the Handsworth area, and we follow him for a short distance where he was arrested then on the street.
The police then went into the address, and there they found that big suitcase which had a padlock on it.
The suitcase is locked. We force entry to the suitcase.
Inside that suitcase was nearly £50,000 in cash, along with gold and jewellery, all of which had belonged to Mr. B. It was clear to them that this was a murder that had been motivated by greed.
More incriminating evidence is seized from Belcar Singh, including Mr. B's mobile phone and some keys.
Thankfully, the keys in his possession, not only are they the keys to the diner, not only are they the keys to Mr. B's private residence, but there's also keys to the locks on the suitcase. To me, I'm starting to feel reassured that we've got the right man, and we're starting to build up that evidential picture to show his involvement.
All of these turned out to be critical pieces of evidence in the case that the police were building against him.
Without delay, Singh is taken in for questioning.
During his period in custody, Belcar was pulling out all the tricks in order to delay being interviewed. Whether this was just to try and give him a little bit of thinking time, or whether he thought that we would just go away, I don't know. But he started complaining that his brain wouldn't work if he was questioned for more than 30 minutes. He was saying that his eyes were hurting and he had to go and see an eye specialist. So we had to get him sent off to the local eye hospital for an examination. When he came back, he started to complain about the food. There wasn't enough. So he was given 2 portions of curry. Then he complained there wasn't sufficient chicken in the curry.
Whilst police deal with an awkward interviewee, rumours that the suspected killer has been arrested spread back to Halfway House. It's welcome news for Romy, who was once in the frame.
Then I a little bit relax because I live local over there, and everyone is think about me because I'm a young person, and everyone think maybe I do those things,
When I saw the fact that it was Mr. Singh, I was quite shocked and saddened that someone that Mr. B had trusted had chosen to do that to him.
It was a relief that they found somebody, and I think if I remember even myself thinking, really? Really? How did he do that? And why?
Back at the police station, Belcar Singh finally breaks his silence.
He starts to overplay some of his medical complaints. We know he's described as being partially sighted, but I believe he starts the game now of trying to overplay those vulnerabilities in an effort to say, look at me, I'm a frail old man, I couldn't possibly have committed this offence. I've learned over the years that people will try and do anything to get out of, admitted to their guilt, especially of an offence of such as this magnitude.
Under pressure, the suspect gives his version of events.
So initially, Belcar says that just before closing up time, he decides that he's going to go upstairs, he's going to have something to eat, which he does in his room, and then he goes to bed about 10:30 that night. He doesn't see Mr. B again. He gets up and he gets into the taxi at 6 o'clock to travel across to West Brom. He denies any knowledge of the murder of Mr. B.
So detectives press Singh about a blood-stained diner receipt, Mr. B's phone, jewellery, and £50,000 in cash that are all found in his suitcase.
Whilst he admitted that the case belonged to him, he was unable to give any account or any explanation for the items that were located within it, the items which we believe had been stolen from Mr. B.
3 days after Singh's arrest and questioning, DCI Mark Bellamy and his team are on the cusp of nailing their prime suspect.
We've recovered 2 bloodied knives from a cupboard within the kitchen at the diner. We've conducted a Home Office post-mortem on Mr. B, which says that he'd suffered a number of injuries inflicted on him by a bladed weapon. We have the fact that CCTV doesn't show anybody else entering that diner. The items of property recovered from the suitcase have now been identified by Harry that they were his father's possessions. So with that, I believe that we've got sufficient at this moment in time to go to CPS for a threshold charging decision. And thankfully they were of the same mind and gave the authorities to charge Belcar Singh with the murder of Satnam.
But the hard graft for the investigators is only just beginning.
Getting him arrested and getting him charged is probably only the start of the investigation. We're now tasked with building a thorough and complete investigation in order that we can convince the jury beyond all reasonable doubt that the person in the dock has actually committed this offence.
In Shrewsbury, Shropshire, kitchen worker Belcar Singh has been charged with the murder of his boss, known as Mr. B. As police build their case for the forthcoming trial, the lab has been testing a T-shirt that was found at the diner.
On the neckline of that T-shirt was found DNA attributed to Belcar Singh.
But importantly for us, we've got airborne blood from Mr. B on the T-shirt, which shows that that T-shirt was in close contact to Mr. B when he was struck, and wet blood went through the air and landed on the T-shirt.
The police concluded that this was in fact Belcar Singh's T-shirt that he had forgotten to get rid of. It was a highly incriminating piece of evidence.
But there's something even more compelling linking Belcar Singh to the murder scene.
There's a Lonsdale trainer footwear mark within the blood. Now we're told by at least 2 witnesses that Belcar Singh wore Lonsdale trainers. We never found any Lonsdale trainers, and it's my view that at 5:13 when he's going to the skip, he's depositing his Lonsdale trainers into the skip and they're subsequently taken away by the refuse company. So unfortunately we never recovered those.
As cunning as he was, Mr. Singh knew that the bins were collected on a Monday at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning.
Belcar Singh denied that he ever wore them. He said he wore some Skechers.
It was those shoes that would be the downfall of Mr. Singh.
Not only have we got witnesses telling us that he wears Lonsdale trainers, But we've also got him on CCTV on the Sunday, going into the post office earlier in that day, and he's wearing Lonsdale trainers. So he's lying.
And Singh's Lonsdale trainers would provide police with the final piece of the forensic jigsaw.
They identified some footwear marks leading away from the blood pool towards 2 kitchen cupboards. When they opened up the kitchen cupboard, located within there were 2 knives. We were able to establish that Mr. B's blood was on the handle and on the blade of one of those knives.
Barely 6 months after Mr. B's horrific killing, Belkar Singh is brought before Stafford Crown Court, accused of murder.
Mr. Singh denied all responsibility and had pleaded not guilty, and now had to face the jury with the evidence.
The prosecution sets out its case. Belkar Singh is portrayed as a man in debt, on edge as he's long overstayed his work visa. The murder of Mr. B is his way out of his predicament.
The prosecution explained that it was planned by Belkar Singh, although appearing quite frail and unassuming, had somehow, out of some jealousy, planned to kill Mr. B for his life savings.
We know that he was sending money back home, and therefore there was a motive now around finances.
It all suggested that this was a crime that had been motivated by naked greed. He was a poor man. He was trying to keep his family in India back home. He decided that the only way to get his hands on all that cash was to dispatch Mr. B, but he did it in the most extraordinarily brutal fashion.
Knowing he'd be left alone with Mr. B on the night of Sunday the 25th of June, Singh seized his moment to pounce on his victim.
The belief was that he'd been hit over the head with a metal pan in order to daze him before he was stabbed. He was attacked with at least 3 different knives, including a meat cleaver. It was clear that he'd been on the receiving end of a frenzied and brutal attack.
Having carried out this terrible attack on Mr. B, Belkar Singh's had the forethought to rifle through his trousers and remove the takings from the till receipt and the keys from his trouser pocket, which then enables him to go upstairs into Mr. B's private room and gain access to it, and therefore take the jewellery and the remainder of the cash.
While my dad was lying there in the kitchen with all his injuries. For all I know, he probably got himself a few hours kip before he got up and left the next morning. The state of mind to do that baffles me. Absolutely baffles me.
Now it's the turn of Belkar Singh's defence.
We were faced with a mountain of evidence. It's difficult representing someone in those circumstances, but it's important that everyone who stands trial in one of our courts has a fair trial and has someone representing them who is going to do the best job that they can. In presenting Belkar Singh's case to the jury, we emphasised the fact that he was so small and with such terrible eyesight, all of which was documented by his optometrist, that he couldn't be the sort of person who would commit this crime. He moved very slowly. Witnesses who worked with him said that he was like a sloth. The jury were clearly puzzled by all of this.
And when Singh is asked to take to the stand, he makes the most of his moment.
When he would walk over to give his statement, he'd make sure that his steps were small, calculated, maybe bump into a table on the way. Mr. Singh was very clever in front of the jury to maintain the act.
Faced with the forensic evidence placing him at the murder scene, Singh changes the story he first gave detectives.
It became impossible for Belkar Singh to maintain his story that he hadn't seen the killing or been part of it, and so he made up a new one. He told the court when he gave evidence that in fact what had happened that night was that he had been in the kitchen with Mr. B when 2 intruders had come through the side door.
They came in through a door that wasn't covered by the CCTV, and they started to have an argument with Mr. B. This was an argument over an old business transaction which resulted in them attacking Mr. B and killing him with knives.
He tried to intervene, but he couldn't. Once the violence had ended, they took him upstairs, frog-marched him to Mr. B's bedroom, and then ransacked his room. The jewellery, the gold, the cash, everything was stuffed into a suitcase.
And this is where it gets slightly fanciful, is that they tell Belkar Singh, we know where you live, we know where your family are in India, you're going to take all this money away from the diner, and at some stage we'll catch up with you later and you can give us the money.
It was an extraordinary story, but it was the only one that he could come up with.
The prosecution, though, is having none of it.
The question was put to him if these fictional characters that had come into the diner, why were their footprints never found? To which he spinned another yarn and come up with a very unbelievable story.
They had taken their shoes off to go upstairs. Well, they're really considerate murderers now, aren't they? That they don't want to get blood on the carpet of Mr. B's upstairs apartment. It was incredulous.
After weeks of high, intense court drama, the jury retires to consider their verdict.
It was a very lonely place to be. Day after day, we would sit there waiting for a decision, and there was still no verdict. And thinking, when is this all going to end?
A real emotional roller coaster. And the moment that when the jury returns, well, that's where my head and my stomach are absolutely turning, if I'm honest.
The tension was extraordinary. No one knew what the outcome would be until the foreman stood up and said the word, guilty.
Finally found guilty, and we could draw a line underneath it.
The jury comes to the rightful conclusion, and it's an immense sense of relief.
Belkar Singh is sentenced to life, with a minimum of 27 years.
I remember when the sentence was read out, Mr. Singh just dropping to his knees, and it was some satisfaction in the devastation that I'd seen in him. The only people that are left suffering are the immediate family that have gone through it, and that never ever leaves you. It never ever leaves you.
Harry has since sold his father's beloved diner.
I still dream of my dad. He's running around in the diner, serving customers. And you lose that one person that treats you like the center of their universe, and then one day it's gone. You never really come to terms with it, but you have to live with it, I suppose.
One of the girls said, "Has anyone seen Abby?" And I remember thinking at first that, she's just had a baby. Sometimes you do just want to get away from the world and just go for a walk.
I don't think she took her purse, her handbag, so she's got no financial means of support. We've just got a young woman who has disappeared into the night.
Within 2 hours, something just didn't feel right.
And I'm reporting from Barnsley this afternoon, following the discovery of a body.
I remember just thinking, no, because this doesn't happen in our town, and it doesn't happen to a girl like her. She's too nice. Surely it has to be some kind of sick prank.
It just got worse and worse, each little bit of extra information that come out of it.
Was he trying to force himself on her sexually and she was rebuffing him? and that brought his rage to the fore? I don't know, but what I do know is the story he gave was wrong, it was false, and it was given to hide the real truth.
Nestled at the edge of West Yorkshire sits the tight-knit community of Castleford.
Castleford is very generation-based. Like, I can trace back my family to 200 years living in Castleford. So we do tend to stick to his roots.
I'd describe Castleford as a brilliant place to live. There's certain parts of Castleford, if you set yourself up at a high point, you can see for miles. Yeah, you can see all the way over to Leeds, and you can see all the way to Emley Moor. Yeah, you're just in the heart of England, I guess. It's a lovely place to be and feel safe around, actually. Yeah.
Probably what it's known for most famously is Castleford Tigers, the rugby league team in the Super League.
So a typical newspaper headline for Castleford would probably be something like "Police make arrest as person hit by car," but something that can happen in any place at any time.
In terms of sort of crime, you don't hear a lot, from the Castleford area.
The safe neighbourhood is the perfect place to raise a family, and it's where 29-year-old schoolteacher Abby Fisher grew up.
Abby's parents were foster parents, so she had a lot of people coming in and out of the home, but it was a very tight family, very loving, very caring. I was 11 years old when I first met Abby. There was a small group of us that kind of latched onto each other because we were all very quiet, very shy, and then once we got to know each other, we were like thick as thieves, really. Abby was very, very well behaved, probably because of her wanting to be a teacher when she grew up. No one had a negative word to say about her. She was absolutely lovely.
While still at school, Abby met her future husband, Matthew.
When Abby first told me that she had a bit of a crush on Matthew, I had a bit of a laugh. I'm like, oh, really? It's more like to me, more of you're a bit too quiet, but I was like, oh, are you sure? She's like, oh yeah, I really, really like him. And I'm like, oh, bless you, bless your heart. So they got into a relationship towards the back end of year 11, so we were about 14, 15, that kind of age. And I can't actually remember a moment where we was like, right, we're together now. It just seemed to just gradually happen, and it just faded in, and we just knew that they were together, really. He was quiet, he was very polite, very generous and very caring. Much like Abby, if you wanted help, he would gladly give it to you. And I think that's what's the main thing that drew them together. Even teachers commented on the fact that, they're together because they used to, walk around school holding hands and things like that. And to be fair, when you're at school, relationships, you just think, oh, they're not going to last long. But there's just something about how they're connected that just seemed, he thought that that's a relationship that's just going to last. Abby's parents absolutely loved Matthew. They considered him to be kind of like a bit of a surrogate son to him.
Matt and Abby's relationship continued to flourish through school and college. And when Abby fulfilled her dream of becoming a primary school teacher, Matt was by her side.
Abby's always expressed that she wanted to be a teacher. She was very academically driven, and she used to always say that she wanted to help, especially the younger children. She knuckled down and focused on getting a career done.
Everything was falling into place for the couple, and so taking the next step in their relationship seemed inevitable.
Abby and Matt got engaged in 2012, and then by 2017 they were married. Abby was very much your typical white wedding, your traditional white wedding kind of girl. But I remember her big dream was to get married on this big cruise ship, and that's why she got married. Abby's parents couldn't have wished for a better man to look after their daughter.
Life was good for Abby. Married to her high school sweetheart and having landed her dream job, there was just one thing left to make their lives complete.
I think Abby's knew very early on that she wanted a family. She was very family orientated. I think that is because of her upbringing, where she was used to a lot of children being around. And I remember having a discussion with her, and she was saying, I can't wait to be a mum. It's the one thing that I want in this world. She says, if nothing else, that's what I want.
But Abby and Matt struggle to conceive and make the difficult decision to start IVF.
While Abby was going through IVF, it's a very intrusive procedure, and she was that determined and that focused to have a child that she kind of blocked everything else out. It's very nasty kind of injections and things like that. So I don't know how she did it, but she was determined she was going to do it. We all kind of bubble wrapped her a little bit, because it is, I do know it's a treatment that can be very mentally exhausting as well as physically exhausting.
But the treatment is ultimately successful, and on their third round of IVF, Abby falls pregnant with a child she has longed for.
She was absolutely ecstatic. She was nearly bursting into tears. She was just like, I can't wait, it's just so exciting. With Matthew, he was very focused on Abby. From what I'd seen on Facebook and what Abby had said, that he was absolutely over the moon. Nervous, as all first-time parents are, but he was very excited to become a dad.
When their baby daughter arrives, Abby is elated.
Everyone was just so absolutely amazed because she was one of those women that you could tell she was just a natural born mum. Seeing how excited she was to be a mum. I remember her messaging me saying, this sleep regression's a pain and stuff like any advice on how to get her to sleep through at night and stuff like that. But then she'd be posting all over Facebook, first time that she'd eaten more of a solid food and stuff like that.
Matt and Abby embrace parenthood and soon start to take their daughter to local parent and baby classes.
I was sat usually at the opposite side of the hall to Abby. She just looked absolutely besotted with a little girl and just really, really happy. I take my hats off to anybody that's out and about with a new baby. Just to get out the door at first is a massive challenge. You're sleep deprived and the checklist of things that you've got to do before you leave the house, it's a big thing. So they looked like they were just settling into parenthood like we all do. They just came across as just kind of new parents enjoying the journey. Each time I saw Abby, she was at a class with her husband as a family unit. They looked so happy together and they were filming the daughter. It's a lovely memory to snap on your iPhone and play back. Yeah, I could see them doing that over and over again.
Once you've had a baby, your relationship with your partner kind of does get put to one side because you are fully focused on looking after this little baby that can't look after itself. But I know that for a fact that they were very doting parents and they were very focused on bringing her up.
But just days after Matt and Abby celebrate their daughter's christening, friends and family get some worrying news.
I remember reading on Matt's Facebook something along the lines of, has anyone seen Abby? If you have, can you contact me?
Matt not only posts online to alert friends and family, he also informs police of Abby's disappearance.
Matthew said that he woke up on the morning of the 9th, the baby daughter was next to him in bed and that Abby was missing.
And I remember at first not really worrying about it because I thought, she's a first-time mum going through IVF. It's a very, stressful thing being a new parent. And I just thought that maybe she just wants to get out, go for a walk, kind of like clear her head and things like that.
There are quite regular missing from home reports. Most are very short term and most have an explanation behind them. I mean, some of the common reasons that people go missing is relationship breakdowns, husband and wife fallouts, debt. These are probably among the most common reasons why people will go missing, and most are found very quickly and have not come to any harm. But that's not always the case.
In the West Yorkshire town of Castleford, new mum Abby Fisher has been reported missing by husband Matt. as friends worry that the pressure of caring for a newborn is taking its toll on Abby. Concerning details of her disappearance emerge.
Matthew said that he woke up on the morning of the 9th, the baby daughter was next to him in bed, and that Abby was missing. So that raises the suspicion level straight away. And why would she leave a baby daughter? To Abby particularly, this was a precious birth. It's a very, very difficult treatment to go through his IVF, and I would have been suspicious that she'd left a daughter. I wouldn't have expected a mother to act like that.
I remember once the news broke that Abby had gone missing, within a couple of hours we just sensed that something wasn't quite right.
We first heard about the missing person appeal for Abby through West Yorkshire Police. Matthew told police when he reported Abby as a missing person that Abby had gone and that she hadn't taken her car, and that she also hadn't taken her phone as well.
I don't think she took her purse or handbag, so she's got no financial means of support. The red flags are waving, they're blowing in the wind by this stage for me.
One of the things that kind of got me a little bit suspicious was the fact that Abby did not go anywhere without a phone. She typically had a phone glued to her at all times, and also the fact that she had an inhaler and her inhaler was left behind, and she was obviously very conscious that if I'm going to go for a walk I need my inhaler just in case anything triggers.
Once you've established that there has been no contact with family or friends, then you're thinking, this doesn't seem right.
So Abby Fisher is a school teacher. She's a mum to a young child, 6-month-old baby girl. And ultimately she's a wife as well, a family person, very close to her family, her mum and dad. And from what we've heard about the family, they had a really close bond.
You would have expected she'd have contacted her parents. She's very close to her parents, but no contact there.
As the community becomes increasingly alarmed, friends and family organise a search party alongside police.
Originally, it was our little friend group that was saying, right, who's free, is anyone available? We'll just walk the usual routes where Abby goes. And one of our other friends set up a Facebook group and tagged Abby's Facebook and Matt's Facebook, and we were sharing it everywhere saying, listen, if anyone's free, do you mind, these are the routes that we know Abby typically likes to walk on. And everyone, even if they didn't know who she was, there were strangers that were saying, we're free, we're going to come and help you find her.
My first way of knowing about it was from social media. There was a post on there about people meeting up to try and search for Abby, and there was a picture of her. And straight away I recognised her face. So that was taking place on the Saturday in the town centre of Castleford. People were trying to use their best efforts to find him. Everything went viral basically in more of a way than I've ever seen anything kick off before, because the whole community wanted to find her, and obviously such a respected teacher and well-loved friend, mum. It was just, I could see that it was already attracting massive attention. It got a lot of people, and obviously the police were involved.
And then we of course heard about teachers from the school who were out looking for Abby. There were night searches for Abby, people using their phone torches to try and find any trace of her and where she could be.
And trying to sort of think of ways that we could help find her, places that might not have been checked. Her house wasn't far from the river, so it crossed my mind, could a body be in that river, because it's literally like a stone's throw from where she lived. We'd had an absolute massive heat wave that weekend. So I remember being in our back garden, temperatures, I think we'd got up to 38, 42 roundabout. And he was thinking, if somebody's missing this time, how are they going to be surviving with all fluids? And we're just thinking, where is she? We're all struggling with this sweltering heat. Wonder where she is, wonder if she's getting a drink, wonder if somebody's having some sort of mental breakdown or, a really bad episode. How is it, have they got access to the basics, or have they got some comfort, or whereabouts could she be?
As the search for missing Abby continues, Matt and Abby's family are doing their best to support one another.
Matthew is sitting with Abby's parents at their home, just listening for news, because they don't know what's happened.
As Abby's family wait, Matt raises a chilling possibility to her parents.
And we know that Matthew as well, once he'd called Abby's parents to their home, he actually joined Abby's father on a search for Abby herself. At that point, Matthew told Abby's father that she'd been considering taking her own life.
That's a possibility which could never be discounted.
I think everybody was going along the lines of possibly postnatal depression because it's so soon after having a newborn child, but it just didn't sort of make sense at all, because you could see how in love they were with the little girl, and she didn't have the demeanour of somebody that looked, I'd say, depressed, or that looked like they were really, really struggling. It was not somebody that you'd think could just take herself away in the middle of the night and sort of commit suicide, which is kind of what everybody was thinking, I think.
As fears for Abby's safety grow, so do concerns for her husband, Matt.
We were concerned for his welfare as well, because if your wife has gone out of the home and possibly taken their own life or missing, how would that make the remaining parent feel left with child on your own? So from our perspective, we wanted to know that the little baby was all right and that he was doing all right.
As the community rallies, the news everyone has been dreading comes from the police, who had been searching undergrowth adjacent to a lay-by in Brierley, South Yorkshire.
We just know that police found Abby's body partially covered in bushes.
I remember just sitting for a while and just thinking, no, because this doesn't happen, especially in our town, and it doesn't happen to a girl like her. She's too nice. Surely there's something. It has to be some kind of like sick prank, but yeah, it definitely hit. And that night, I didn't even sleep that night. I was just up crying constantly.
I remember opening my phone and seeing what had happened. It made me feel absolutely sick. You just couldn't take it in. We all found it horrific, not just how she'd been killed, but the fact that her body had been dumped like half an hour away in some woodland. I didn't even want to go in that area or even think of driving anywhere near there at that point. And then the more you were reading about it, the more looking at what had happened, it's like each little bit of extra information that come out of it, it just got worse and worse.
We now, no doubt, we have got a murder.
Hi, I'm Claire Lewis from The Star, and I'm reporting from Barnsley this afternoon, following the discovery of a body in the Brierley area of the town yesterday. Although formal identification is yet to take place, police believe the body to be that of 29-year-old Abby Fisher.
Just 48 hours after having been reported missing, the body of new mum Abby Fisher has been found 12 miles from her home.
The body was discovered in undergrowth in a wooded area off Southmore Road. Police want to hear from anybody who saw anything suspicious, particularly motorists who may have dashcam footage.
We know that Abby was killed at some point between July 8th and July 9th. There were quite serious marks on her neck, which were typical of being strangled, and there were also defence injuries as well to the rest of her body, so her arms, her legs, and also her stomach as well.
But as Abby's friends and family reel from the news of her death, they are horrified when within 24 hours, police make an arrest.
I remember when our friend told our group that Matthew had been arrested. I felt sick.
You want to cry, you want to be sick. You want to just not believe it's happened, basically. It takes you a while to sort of reread it, register it again, and it just don't sink in whatsoever.
I remember once I told my partner at the time that Abby had gone missing. The first thing he said to me, he just said, listen, I don't want to sound horrible, but they do say that if someone goes missing completely out of the blue, the first person you look at is the partner.
Since her disappearance 3 days earlier, West Yorkshire Police have been working diligently to piece together the events surrounding Abby's death.
They realised quite early on that things weren't right. And Matthew had come into the centre of the frame as a suspect.
It all started to unravel on the movement of Matthew Fisher's car.
I know they very quickly got onto the CCTV, and he's on the major routes in Castleford. And at a time when he said he was actually in bed, his car was spotted leaving Castleford.
So we know that Abby was reported as a missing person to West Yorkshire Police after 10 a.m. on July 9th. But what we now know is that Matthew had set off from his home at 4 o'clock on July 9th in his car. He travelled first to Lancashire, then we think through Derbyshire and then to South Yorkshire.
So now we're thinking, what's he doing? One of the sites which he obviously stopped at was near Brayley in South Yorkshire, and it was there they found a body at the side of the road in a ditch.
Police believe that in the early hours of the morning, Matt Fisher left the family home with his dead wife's body in the car, finally stopping in an area familiar to him.
He's driven round on this route through, these various different counties, Lancashire, Derbyshire, South Yorkshire, presumably looking for a site to dispose of the body. And he ends up a place in Brayley in an area which apparently he used to play there when he was a kid.
So perhaps there was some sort of recollection that he had of that area, and perhaps he thought it would be an ideal spot to leave Abby's body. We knew the area, he knew where he wanted to go when he set off with Abby's body on that morning.
With Matt as their main suspect, police scrutinised the signal from his phone on the night they believe Abby was killed.
They then start looking at cell site analysis. This is where your mobile phone is turned on. And as you move about the country, your phone connects to retrieve signals from various of the cell sites across the country. And you can track people. So they tracked him, and he went for some hours on various different routes into Lancashire, from West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire. They went in quite a roundabout route. They have tracked his signal and found his wife's body. Obviously, he has lied. And it was then a matter of pulling the pieces together and presenting that evidence to him, that, he was the person who took her from the house. He was the person who had killed her, and he was the person who had actually disposed of her body.
When Matt's barrister speaks to him in custody, Matt can offer no alibi.
It's very difficult because he had no memory of what occurred.
In trying to build up their case further, detectives speak to Abby and Matt's neighbours, who reveal that they were aware of a disturbance in the early hours.
There were some reports of neighbours hearing banging from Abby Fisher's home. Neighbours had told police they'd heard what sounded like an argument.
I think there'd been a lot of noise through the walls, so obviously adjoining neighbours must have heard a lot of violence and arguments that night, which, it just don't bear thinking about, does it?
The information they get from the neighbours allows detectives to estimate when Abby was killed.
If we think that she actually died at the time that the next door neighbours heard the argument between 10:30 and midnight, probably more like midnight, and he didn't leave till 5 in the morning, he sat some time thinking about what he's going to do. Now he's had ample time to say, okay, I'll just ring the police and say, I just had an argument, I lost it, and I'm really sorry. Now he's made a conscious decision that he's going to try and conceal what he's done.
This timeline leads detectives to further troubling conclusions.
We do do know that Matthew actually sat with her body for a number of hours before he put Abby in the boot of his car and actually left their 6-month-old daughter at home by herself while he drove from Castleford to South Yorkshire, which is not a short drive. The 6-month-old child was alone in the house for 5 hours while Abby was in the boot of Matthew's car.
And then, when detectives scrutinise Abby's online activity, they uncover more disturbing evidence.
When the police looked at Abby's internet search history, they discovered the search, "Why does my husband hate me? And can I get counselling on the NHS?" Quite a strong term, and to actually Google it, you're thinking, what's going off in this relationship?
It was quite clear that she loved Matthew. You don't sit and Google how to save a marriage if you don't love that person and you want to make the marriage work.
With news of Matt in custody spreading, Talking Castleford turns to the message he had posted on Facebook the day Abby disappeared.
As a journalist, you report on a lot of missing people, but there are cases that begin to snowball, and this unfortunately was one of them. As soon as we knew that Matthew had been arrested, you go back to his Facebook post and you see that he's been asking the public for help in finding his wife, asking people to ring him if they'd seen her.
And at the time, I remember reading it, part of my brain was kind of, that sounds a little bit tone deaf. Like, if it wasn't like my partner, I'd put a little bit more emotion into it, but that's the last, you put that back in, like, oh no, it's stress, don't blame him kind of thing.
And we're just all been like sent on a wild goose chase basically, because like it said my wife's disappeared and put all this stuff on Facebook trying to cover up what had been done.
The community start to question Matt's behaviour in the time since he reported Abby missing.
Matthew's sat at home with Abby's parents watching the news. He knows what's happened. So he has got to act normally as best he can, because, he's come up with some sort of plan which he hopes to get away with. So he just carries on as normal as he can be at that moment. He knows what he's done, and he just hopefully he's going to get away with it. But of course, the discovery of Abby's body would change things, because then there will be evidence potentially to connect back to Matthew and to the home. And he's just acting normally as if she's a genuine missing person and he is concerned.
Matthew himself actually went on a walk with Abby's dad as a sort of way of trying to find Abby. Obviously Abby's parents were concerned for her, and Matthew joined in that search, and obviously that was just an attempt to cover up what he'd done. Matthew told Abby's father that she'd been considering taking her own life. So he's here trying to plant these little seeds of doubt and ultimately trying to cover his own tracks.
All that I could keep thinking was, I was sat in that room with a murderer. Like, he was sat at the other side of the room. How on earth?
And then, in an unexpected development, just hours after his arrest, Matt starts to speak.
He accepted that he must have committed the offence, and it was on that basis that he pleaded guilty to it. But he couldn't remember doing it.
And as the gravity of the situation sinks in, Matt's memory begins to return.
Matthew Fisher told the psychiatrist that he'd smothered Abby after an argument that the pair had had, which centred around Abby saying that she was likely to return to her parents' home to live with her parents, and also it centred around Abby returning back to work as a school teacher. And she'd told Matthew that she was ready to go back to work, she felt like she needed to go back to work, and it sounded like Matthew didn't like that. He wanted Abby to be at home with him ultimately, and obviously Matthew took some sort of issue with that and snapped and ultimately killed his wife.
But as Matt fleshes out his confession in custody, cracks in his account of events begin to show.
What you're saying does not fit the facts at all. She suffered major trauma. Given the circumstances and what the neighbours said, that there was a disturbance, there's more things happening here than he's actually admitted.
30-year-old father of one, Matt Fisher, formally pleads guilty to the murder of his wife, Abby. But in court, the inconsistencies in his story become glaring.
Because his answers don't actually fit in with the forensic and pathological evidence.
Matthew told the psychiatrist that he'd snapped and smothered Abby, but the prosecution outlined that didn't really explain the injuries that Abby herself had suffered. There were quite serious marks on her neck, which were typical of being strangled.
He said that he smothered her with her t-shirt, which was not confirmed by the forensic evidence of the pathologist who said manual strangulation was the cause of death. You would not have got the injuries to her neck by smothering her with a t-shirt.
Many of Abby's injuries suggest that Matt's account of events may not be true.
She had a lot of soft tissue and blunt trauma injuries, and he gave an explanation to say, one, that she'd fallen down the stairs. Well, given that he's already previously lied about other things, take that with a pinch of salt.
The truth is far more sinister.
There were also defence injuries as well to the rest of her body, so her arms, her legs, and also her stomach as well. So the judge actually said that Matthew had, from what it sounded like, submitted Abby to quite a serious assault and ultimately killed her in their family home.
But with Matt's guilty plea, he is not obliged to explain.
Because I suspect he would know that if he went for diminished responsibility, temporary insanity, then he would have to answer those difficult questions that he didn't want to answer, which is, why did you say you smothered her when you strangled her? And why has she got all these injuries? Why say she fell down the stairs when she clearly didn't? Because she's got defence injuries. You were attacking her and she was fighting back, and you then brutally placed your hands around her throat and you strangled your wife until she was dead. He don't want to answer those questions. He just wants to hide away in prison and make himself believe that he ain't as bad as he actually is.
The evidence against Matt is overwhelming.
I remember hearing that he'd wrapped her in a blanket and duct taped the blanket kind of closed and things like that.
We heard from the prosecution that police found fingerprints on gaffer tape next to Abby's body.
There was no way that he were going to deny what had happened, because they found a can beside Abby that had his DNA on it, so that he'd obviously had a drink once he'd disposed of her body, so there was no way that he could have denied it.
The prosecution's case was that this was a violent murder that ultimately Matthew would try to cover up in the early stages, because it was actually Matthew that made the missing persons call to police in the first place, told them that his wife was missing. And obviously that was just an attempt to cover up what he'd done and to try and cover his tracks. He then phoned Abby's parents, who rushed over to the house, and as he was sat with Abby's parents, Matthew Fisher started to Google West Yorkshire Police, South Yorkshire Police, and also BBC News, and the prosecution told the court that that was a clear attempt to try and find out if Abby's body had been found by the force as he was sat with their parents. So as he was playing the role of a concerned husband, he was trying to find out if what he'd done had been discovered.
Having heard all the evidence, Abby's family make the brave decision to confront Matt in court.
Matthew barely raised his head. He looked at the floor. It was Abby's parents who had the guts really to stand up and to face him and to let him know that what he had done, how it had affected them and what they were going through. And for Abby's mum to stand up and deliver the victim impact statement that she did, and also for Abby's father as well, because he stood up in court, as did her brother. It's still so raw. It's remarkable really, that the bravery that they had to have and just how powerful it was as well is something that stays with you. And certainly Abby's mother's victim impact statement is something that won't leave me for a while, just because of how raw and emotional it was. She broke down a number of times, but she was determined to get through it, and she had things that she wanted to say to Matthew.
You sat there and said nothing, knowing you had killed my baby girl. You dragged her through the undergrowth and dumped her in the woods where you played as a child. Everyone was desperately hoping to find our daughter, and you knew she was dead. You killed my baby girl. What the hell gave you the right to do that? Her death has changed our lives immeasurably. I miss my daughter so much.
It was a very passionate and tearful statement that Abby's mother made, and she actually ordered him to look at her. He did briefly, and then put his eyes down and started crying. Of course, he's crying for himself, he's not crying for anybody else.
Abby's mother said that they'd taken him in as their own son for him to live with them in their own home. So we spent 5 years living with them, and Abby's mother said that he'd sat there on July 9th, pretending that he was helping the family in their search for Abby. He sat there knowing that he'd killed her baby girl. Abby's brother said that ultimately Matthew had made the world a darker place because he'd taken Abby's light away from him and away from the world as well.
With the damning evidence laid out in court and the impact statements from Abby's family heard, it is the job of Matt's barrister to offer mitigation in an effort to reduce his sentence.
The atmosphere in the courtroom was obviously very tense with a lot of distressed people. It's never easy on a murder case, quite simply because virtually everyone in the courtroom is there for the victim rather than the defendant. And you obviously have a natural sympathy for their position as well. So when you mitigate on behalf of the defendant, you are always conscious of the family being present. The mitigation on behalf of Matthew Fisher was essentially the fact that he'd pleaded guilty at the very earliest opportunity and that he was remorseful for his actions. Matthew was very distressed by the whole proceedings.
At the court, the hearing that I went to, he didn't say anything about his regrets, his apologies, anything like that. I remember sitting there watching him and thinking, why are you not showing emotion? Like, I couldn't see a single tear at all. He didn't seem to be crying. He was more annoyed with himself, he was upset with himself for getting caught doing something rather than what he'd actually done. But I do know that if he did apologise, it wasn't something that we were going to accept off him anyway, whether he wanted to say he was sorry or not, because it's something that you can't forgive, really.
Matthew Fisher is sentenced to life for the murder of his wife Abby. He will serve a minimum term of 15 years.
So I think we can see by the number of people that have attended at court today to support Abby and her family that she was loved by many, truly loved by many, by her friends and family, by a community, but also by the teachers that she worked with and the pupils that were at school that have also been affected by this crime. The community has obviously been shocked and devastated by what Matthew Fisher did to Abby, and his actions have left Abby's daughter with neither parent, which is truly devastating. Nothing will ever be able to bring Abby back for her mother and father or any of her friends and family or the community. I do hope that the justice given today will give them small comfort. I know it is very small comfort. They would like to be given the opportunity and privacy now to grieve for Abby and to also focus on looking after Abby's daughter and all of their other grandchildren. Thank you.
I remember the only emotion I was feeling at the time was absolute rage. I remember talking to my friends and things like that. It says, I don't even feel pity for him. There's no, oh, I feel so sorry for him now that you're going to have to go sit in a prison cell, not see your child, you've lost your life. I just remember thinking, you've done this, you deserve it.
Whatever was going off in their marriage at that moment in time when this happened, he had choices. He could have said, go stay with your mum, take the baby, and a few days and, let's talk things through. I don't know. But what I do know is the story he gave was wrong, it was false, and it was given to hide the real truth that only he knows.
We've had to fill in the blanks ourselves. We thought that maybe he was jealous of his daughter because she was getting all the love, all the attention. He was used to it just being him and Abby. So we're thinking, well, maybe has he got jealous of his own child, and is that something that triggered him and wound him up one day and he just couldn't control himself?
This is not something that happens every day. This is something that stays with people who lived on the same street, people who knew Abby as well, who joined in the search for her. This is not something that leaves a community very quickly. And Abby was a mum, daughter, sister, and ultimately this is something that any family could go through.
The reaction, obviously, in a case of this nature is it's very distressing for everyone that is involved. The family were clearly and understandably very, very distressed. It was a tragic case for all concerned.
You read about these things and you see crime documentaries and everything else, but you'd never ever believe that it could happen to somebody in your network. But people that are very close to Abby, such as daughter and a family, and that they'll never be the same again, will they?
That little girl's going to grow up and find out that her mother was murdered by her father. So he has damaged everybody's lives. Everybody's. It's just a tragedy all the ways round, and a tragedy that you just feel should never have happened. If only he'd said, OK, go to your mother's. We'll work things out later.
Her loss is definitely, it's put a massive hole in the family. The fact that they've got their grandchild left behind. The little girl, she just looks the absolute double of her mum, and she's got the personality of her already. And I think that is the only thing that's been holding them together, because they have to be strong for the daughter. I choose to focus on all the happy memories that I have with Abby. I definitely try to focus on the positive things, and a little girl's definitely got a lot of aunties that'll definitely help her to remember who her mum was.